it's 7:30, so we'll start. Some strange noise. Welcome everybody. Here we are. We've got more people coming in. We'll just wait for that. Okay, welcome everybody to our Christmas meeting, a routine meeting, except that it's the Christmas one, which is why we have the bottles and the crisps. It's not there every time. And we'll start the meeting. Apologies for absence.
Councillor Sykes has a governor's meeting tonight, and Councillor Benning will be late. He's working, and he hopes to be back 9 o'clock-ish, she's hoping.
Happy with that?
Oh, and Borough Councillor will be here.
Oh, and the Borough Councillor.
Yes, he has a meeting.
Okay.
What's our quorum?
3.
So long as we don't have 2 fall over, we're all right. Declaration of any interest, pecuniary or other, by members?
No.
Nothing obvious, I don't think. No, good. So we don't need any applications. A reminder to everybody that this meeting is recorded for publication, which means being put on the internet, and we'll get to that further down as well. So at this point I'll adjourn the meeting for the public session for people who want to speak. A reminder that there's a 4-minute limit. It should be on items on the agenda or items that you would like us to consider for a future agenda. So who would like to, we usually start with the planning applications, so the order we've got them here is Underhill Orchard first, so I think you're here from Underhill Orchard. Would you like to say anything to help us think about your application?
No, I'm Claire, it's my partner Tom, and we sent you an email hopefully giving you a little bit of our background. And we're here really if you've got any questions for us. We just moved back to the village and quite like to set up home with our sheep.
You were in the village earlier on then, were you, and then moved away?
Tom was, born and bred here.
You're here originally, and you're a farmer, are you then? Or a shepherd or whatever?
My father was a farmer at Mains Farm, passed away several years ago.
Right.
Was brought up with farming and well, I enjoy it really. And I'd like to look after the land down there and continue.
Okay. Is the land that you're farming now around Underhill Orchard or elsewhere? It is around there.
There's 8 acres at Underhill Orchard and we rent, is it 8 acres at Woodchurch?
Okay. And it's sheep all over. That's what you do, is it?
Yeah.
There's 30 sheep, just a small flock. No.
31 at the moment.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot more coming.
Okay. And you've applied to be able to convert a no longer used farm type outbuilding, I think a shed of some sort, into residential.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of the residential would be then for sale, would it, rather than family?
No,
Or renting?
for us to live in.
Oh, it's for you to live in?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I did read it and I...
Yeah, no, for us to live
So
in.
where you are, you haven't actually got a house on the site, you've got the barn.
Yeah.
It's the barn that's yours, not the adjoining property. Or
No,
whatever.
it's our barn.
It's our
Yeah.
barn on a plot of 8.5 acres.
Indeed, I'm with you. And you want to convert that into residential so you can live there.
Yes. At the moment we're at Heathfield and it's
Oh, and you're travelling up and down from Heathfield each
yes,
day?
I work for an earthworks contractor in Woodchurch full time, so it would help a great deal to live locally as well as work locally.
So how do you look after the sheep when you're coming from Heathfield? Just at a bit of a different way?
After work at the moment.
Right, okay.
So,
Or before work.
yeah.
Okay, and do you work as well?
I do work, yes. Yeah. I work for a pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
I work in regulatory they spend every spare moment in the field over here. So we're here at weekends, and you're here every day. And if you can't make it, I come over and look at the sheep.
So, I mean, it sort of sounds a bit impolite, but it's a sort of, it's not a very fair term, I'm not a farmer, but it's sort of hobby farming in that you have employment elsewhere, but you like the farm because that's your interest.
That's my passion, yes. And
Passion farmer.
Yes.
Okay.
It'd be nice to make it work financially one day, but
yeah.
Okay.
that's, yeah.
Would anyone else like to raise questions? Alan?
So, just, I generally it's really covered this, but if there are 8 acres and you've got another 8, I mean, that isn't going to be profitable, is it? So, have you got plans to extend your acreage and that sort of thing?
Yeah, in the future, if we can get settled over here, we can eventually find a bit more grazing. And
So, I mean, can you make a profit on that sort of acreage with sheep?
Well, we would evaluate as we go. I mean, I've got my full-time job as a main income, and I say I prefer sheep farming, but we've got 30 to make a start with.
Yeah.
when you do your hedge cutting and stuff. I don't think we'll ever be rich doing it, that's for sure. But if they can more pay for themselves and maybe have a little bit left over, that'd be great. But
And you've got your jobs as well, of course.
yeah.
Yes.
Anyone else want to?
Can I?
Yes, please.
Sorry, no problem. Can I just ask, if this is granted, is there a likelihood you'll be asking for barns or anything like that on the land in the future? Because you've got animals, obviously.
We did think about a mobile field shelter if we get for a winter lambing if we need it, but not at the moment. No. But they're pretty hardy actually, aren't they? So we don't need somewhere for them.
I noted in your letter as well, you said that you'd spoken to the neighbours and they seem to be okay, in favour or just not objecting.
Yeah, no, Jackie said she was pleased.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't heard from them when they're not here.
No,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
it's amazing.
We get on quite well with them, don't we?
Yeah.
They were quite
Good.
pleased.
Okay. Does anyone else want to raise anything on that particular application?
No, thank you.
No? Good. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll get to that when I start the council meeting again.
Okay.
So for now, we're done there. We haven't got anyone from the other planning application here from the applicant Tile House. They've written to say that they're not available. The neighbours there, you are here, but I believe you have a...
I'm not allowed to.
You're not
we're
allowed
not allowed to comment.
You're not allowed to comment. I know you've told me that before.
Yeah, it was written in the contract.
In your covenants. Yeah, sure, I understand.
Is that's
It's not unknown when a developer splits up a property and wants to carry on doing something next door. I've come across it in Sevenoaks as well.
It's right and proper, is it?
Well, I've known it in Sevenoaks.
Another issue.
And it's enforceable. I mean, if we asked
I think the problem is it would become a civil suit, and obviously the people don't want to get involved in a civil suit with the developer.
But you see what I mean? I just find that a bit awkward.
No.
I just find that.
So I'm not saying.
No, I'm not trying to get you to say anything, but I'm just troubled that
Yeah, so
we find ourselves in that position, but I can't ask you to say anything. Do you see what I
yeah,
mean?
we was troubled when we found out what he'd done as well. But
I mean, if they put those things in late in the contract and you spent a lot of money and they suddenly bang that in, makes it very difficult,
it was
doesn't it?
last minute. We found
Yeah.
out last minute.
And I mean, is it reasonable for, I'm sorry, I don't know a name, for you to tell somebody else your story and for them to speak, or is that not allowed?
Yeah, well,
Were that to happen, that would be arguably possible, so long as it wasn't traced back, I think.
yeah.
And is there anybody else? No,
I haven't noticed anybody.
No, I just wondered, was there anybody else who able
I
to?
think last time my daughter came on behalf
Yeah.
of us and she spoke,
Yeah.
Carly, but she's not here today.
I think that
We'll move on to what she
we
said.
understand the situation and we understand the issues. As councillors will recall, and as you know, we backed the second version of the 3 houses in the past, and we backed the two houses in the past. Both of them were turned down by Ashford, and both of them were turned down by inspectors on appeal. So this is chapter 3. And we'll see when we get to the council meeting what we think. I mean, I think it is a convoluted tale in my view. But when we get to that, we'll talk about it, and you obviously can all sit and listen to it. You won't be able to take part, but then you're not allowed to take part anyway, so no difference. Does anyone else want to raise anything else? Roger, oh sorry, ladies first.
You
Miriam.
can't speak at town house. I mean, there are other neighbours. There's not just one. I think that this application, the same principles stand. The inspector has made a judgment that it is a significant setting site, affecting the A and B and affecting the conservation area. And I don't think anything has really changed in reducing the development from 2 to 1. It's still developing a piece of land which they have said is important in terms of the conservation area and providing that link between the historic core of the village and the agricultural hinterland which defines it. So, I mean, I'm aware that the parish council supported the 3 and they supported the 2, but they now have the benefit of the inspector's decision and the impact on the A&B and the conservation area. So I would hope that they would take that into account when they make the decision tonight on that.
Okay. Thank you, Miriam. Roger.
Just on that one, I'd just like to know if anybody has any idea what would happen if it wasn't built on. What will happen to that land?
Well, I know somebody would be very interested in buying it.
Indeed.
That was why I asked the question.
And retaining it as an
And we
orchard.
would leave it exactly as it is.
Yeah,
We
we
wouldn't
understand
Perhaps
that.
plant some more
Yeah,
trees and
Well,
things.
sorry, I understand that. I've heard from you directly, of course, about that. Yeah, I know the way it's worked.
It's a naive question, but it was
It's a very
answered, I
tangled
guess.
tale, I'm afraid. Was that all you wanted to say, Roger?
On that, yes.
Yeah, okay. Another subject?
The
Miriam?
other subject, Mr. Chairman, you'll be aware, as the councillors will be, that the council itself as a whole very rarely gets plaudits, if ever. I don't think I've ever heard a plaudit. But I, for one, and I think Valerie for 2, would like to congratulate the council very much on the Coronation Field hedge project. The idea from Caroline Everett in the first place, which had certain aspects to it, but that sowed the seed. It was then developed, if you like, or undeveloped, because it raised the original thought to the hedge. And I must say, every time I walk through it now, I smile. I think it is absolutely brilliant, both from a personal point of view and from the Voices point of view. I haven't found anybody who really objects to it. I ask around what we think, and if they're not too keen on the hedge, the sighting, the lack of the danger that always existed at the triangle looking round for people and cars is now gone, and I think it lifts the village. And so the decision and the execution of the whole thing so quickly, I think, is a great plus. I think it's changed the village.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. I did intend anyway, and it's kind of you to raise that, to mention at some point during the session. I'm conscious that there were views on both sides, including expressed here in this room. I have had one person tell me that he still disagrees with it, but that's the only person who's done it directly to me, and said he always did and he still does on reasons of ecology. I don't have to agree with them, but you know, I understand that that's what he says. Everyone else I've heard, like you, on next door and direct contact. In fact, I met one person, which is Cynthia's husband, who actually went out of his way at the church last week to say how pleased he was, and came over and told me how pleased he was. And I didn't know who he was, you know, I had to ask him. But so yes, I recognise that there were views on both sides. Some people will have been disappointed and will remain disappointed. I understand that, but there has been a strong view publicly expressed of support. And I think it's interesting, you touched on this point, Roger, that it would not have happened without Caroline putting it in our
I
mind.
think that's very important to note, actually.
That it just made a little light go, and we thought, there is something there. As soon as I got the application from Caroline, and several pages, and I read it, and then I read it out to Nuala, and she said, that'd be good. And I thought, okay, there's something here. And obviously, we decided we had to cut the hedge anyway. We have to cut it regularly because hedges grow. And we decided on the balance to take it a bit further. And it's shown us what's possible.
Now, I gather there were very few birds' nests, if any, in the hedges. Was there?
Down as far as the bus shelter, along Coronation Fields to the bus shelter. I saw the contractor at the point that he'd reached the bus shelter, and he said at that point they'd only had one. Obviously uninhabited by that time, but one, in other words, one total, not one from the last year, but one from any year that survived.
Yeah, it's not surprising really the speed the traffic goes down past there, but that's another subject.
All true, but we're trying to do something about that, as you know. Would anyone else like to raise anything else? Can I take the opportunity to introduce Jo, who's going to give us a report in a moment. She is our neighbourhood warden. Is that the right term? Community warden, who works for Kent County Council, employed, and she covers Tenterden and a whole host of villages, including this one, to work on loosely things to do with what they probably call community development, but basically trying to maintain community cohesion, avoid trouble and all the rest of it. And Lee, sitting next to her with the white top, is our Lee Phelan is our new volunteer support warden, directly tied to Wittersham. She lives in Wittersham, born in Wittersham, children at the school in Wittersham, Woodland View, and she is going to do it not paid, unlike Jo. She will do a few hours a week as a volunteer, supporting Jo on the ground in Wittersham to improve the coverage, because Jo can't do it all when she's mostly up in Tenterden. And we've taken that on with KCC. The Parish Council is putting in money towards that, but that doesn't go to Jo, that goes to her uniform and her phone and her training, and her training courses.
Could I just ask you a question about that? Could I just ask Lee a question? Have you got your uniform yet, Lee? No. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about
It's
that?
coming. It is coming.
Another warden has. He's the Polish volunteer that does Bowler Green. He's got his uniform. And he said that he believed that the uniforms came in last week and that I should email Jo Shaw to find out if mine's arrived.
And you're waiting.
And Dave, our supervisor, has been on a training course the last couple of days as well, so
it may be held up there.
so yeah, he's
Maybe a
been
Christmas
hard
present on its way.
Yes. The irony here is that, as we just heard, that Lee's was ordered earlier in a group, one was missed out and ordered later, and the later one has been distributed first. But that's the way things work.
I think the problem comes from the actual suppliers that they used, so it's it's difficult. It's difficult to track it down.
Anyway, Lee has been trained and been criminal records checked, or whatever they call it now, barring service, DBS, and got her phone and done her first aid course and got her ID card, so ready to go. And we're very much keen on you being here and welcoming you to do it.
Thank you.
As it happens, for anyone who stays long enough, Mike Hill is due to come tonight, who is our county councillor, but he's at the Rolvenden Parish Council meeting first, and he's coming here next. And he happens to be the county councillor with responsibility for that scheme. So I asked Lee if she'd come here particularly, because then we can say, look, you see, there's only about half a dozen, I think, villages in the whole of Kent that have got volunteers. We went out particularly to say we want one, we'll pay for it, we need one, and Lee very kindly has, I'm delighted to say, has volunteered, and we look forward to it.
So perhaps I'll wait till Mike Hill's in, then I'll ask Lee again if she's got
About,
the uniform.
yes, perfect.
Don't let him out until you give it to him.
He might bring it with him.
Oh yeah.
Some chance. Okay. Right. Now, Joe, your report.
I haven't got an awful lot to tell you this month, I'm afraid. It's been a bit of a quiet month and a bit of a strange month for me as well. I've had a bit of illness, so I wasn't around last week. And I've also had training courses. I've got another one later this week as well. So it's been a bit hit and miss when I've been able to come into the village, unfortunately. I've been trying to deal with the flighted bin issue along the footpath, as you know, through various options. But last time I spoke to you were going to speak to them as well, but I know that you've been unwell as well, so I don't know whether you managed to get a chance to do that. But hopefully
Is it still there at the minute?
It is. I went and checked earlier.
Right,
so,
okay, thank you.
So I am going to try and push that again
Okay.
now that I'm back as well.
Good.
I've had social services referral to come and visit a lady in the village as well. But unfortunately it was while I was off sick, so one of my colleagues actually did that. So I don't have an update on that at the moment. And just generally when I've been able to just being around, but as you know I cover quite a large area, and with being ill and having training courses it's kind of restricted the time that I've been available this month. So
Well, that's one of the benefits of having Lee now, who has an estimate or a sort of outline of about 5 hours a week, which will be more than you're able to spend here, and that's of course the whole point.
And obviously when Lee comes across things as well, I think the idea is as well that maybe we'd be able to work together on some of the things, and obviously with Lee finding out an issue and then being able to inform me
Sure.
if there's other things that need doing, it should be quite good that we'd be able to work together on things as well.
Sure. Okay. Good. Does anyone else want to say anything? I should say, Lee, do you have something you would like to say or not?
Not at this point, thank you.
Okay. Not at this point. Right, good. So can I close the public session? Thank you. We'll start with the meeting proper then. Thank you very much. So the first thing is the minutes to confirm from last meeting. Does anyone have any clarifications, changes, errors, whatever?
No.
There was one I only noticed later. I didn't notice when I went through the draft originally. We've got watch twice in 3684A. Isn't that tiny little thing though? Watch. Sorry about you. Okay. So is everyone happy with that? I can sign the minutes?
Yeah.
Yep, good. Yeah, I know. I'll wait till you get back there. So it's just an issue of voting. Right, so that's done. Thank you. Matters arising then. The first one is Village Green sign update, which was our event just after the last
16th
meeting,
November.
the 16th November, a couple of days after the meeting. Some of us here were there then. It all happened, it was successful. Thanks very much to Miriam and George for organising it between them, and to Miriam for laying on the refreshments afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it well.
Went well.
I have spoken to Mavis since, and she was very happy with it.
Good.
She was quite touched seeing everybody and brought back memories and.
Yeah, I had a Mavis phone call as well.
Did you?
Mm.
But she wasn't she? I mean,
Yes,
she came round.
Very happy.
Yes, she said how villagey it was back to the 1980s. She felt so. It's all good.
I sent an email to the school as well, congratulating the children on
Good.
the turning out and their behaviour and sent them a photograph as well.
Oh, good. Good. Okay, right. Next thing is the replacement of the laptop. It has been replaced. It's not in operation yet. Yvonne is still using the old one because the data has got to be transferred, which will happen on Monday coming.
Yeah.
But it is lovely, beautiful. So
It's a very decent laptop actually. And this one was a pretty crummy one when we got it, but 5 years ago we were broke, so we got a cheap one. Now we've got a more professional one, you know, in the sense that it'll do the job.
I charged it up, so to speak, and then thought, oh, I'll just turn it on and see what happens. And it started talking to me.
Wow. Who are you?
Yes, so I set it up, got all the stuff on, but you know, everything's got to come over. But,
So that will be in use next time.
Yes. The cost was £665.83 plus VAT. It was, I mean, they would talk about £8.99 with the VAT. £7.99, sorry. Which was, originally it was £8.99, but because it was Black Friday, it was down to £7.99, so that was...
And there was another couple of £3 to get it delivered.
Yeah.
So that all went very well, and yes, it is a nice, it's an HP machine, as we said, and by the way, the council said they wanted extended warranty. It got 3 years included free.
Yeah.
The next one is the further update on the use of the parish council's recordings of its meetings. It's necessary for me to apologise because they are still not on the internet, to my frustration, but clearly we've got to get the stuff. The problem, if you remember, was two things. There was a technical problem, and this machine is too slow to actually do the conversion of the files. So on Monday they will be moved onto this machine, and we have also found what we hope is the glitch, where apparently, rather hidden, it will only accept a 15-minute file unless you tick a box to say you want it longer. And since they all went for 15 minutes, we think that's probably what the problem was. So that's up to John next time to find out, and then see if there's another problem. But at the minute, we think that's what it was. So I'm hoping that will all be done as we promised and agreed very shortly. And I'm sorry it's taken so long. But that's next Monday. It should happen with luck, or not even luck. Next one is the hedge around the green incarnation field. We've talked about that. You've applied to Ashford because the conservation area for the little holly tree that's just behind the memorial, standing behind it, and you're waiting for them to give you the okay. Good. There are two reasons that we want to do that. One is because at the moment it takes the silhouette of the war memorial, which otherwise stands against, if it's blue, it stands against the blue sky, except it doesn't, it stands against the green tree. And the other thing is that we want to make an entry right where that tree is, so that you can actually go from the memorial to the field and the field to the memorial, the green to the memorial. And at the minute the holly tree is in the way. What we'll have the opportunity to do if we think about it later, of course, is to put a tree somewhere else, but that one is just, I think Alf reckoned it was self-seeded some years ago, and it's just turned up in an unhelpful place. And the next one on matters arising is the future of the 312 bus route, and that has been resolved by East Sussex County Council with some changes of timetable, but I believe they're fairly minor. I haven't looked at it in any...
Yeah, I don't think we've got a timetable yet, but they will be Stagecoach will be taking over from the 24th of December. And they've said that they've changed it to connect with the 2 and the 2A from Tenterden to Ashford, so that's an improvement.
That's not here on the agenda, but while we're talking about buses, two extra things. I can't vouch for this, but I heard today from the Appledore clerk that she understands that the 293 may be getting knocked off by Kent, but I don't know if that's authentic or not. She believes it, or she worries about it. The other half of that is that we know that Mike Hill, who's coming, the county councillor, said he wanted to come because of the buses. And it may, of course, be that he's going to tell us that same thing, or not. But the 293, as we know, is twice a week or something, so they would argue that it's not a mainline bus. But I don't know who uses it. I have heard of the odd person. Okay, and then it's not marked here, but what would be a little F, if you like, is the invoice from KCC that has come in since the agenda for the amount that we talked about last month for Lee's contribution, which is the training and the phone bill and the uniform.
I have got a breakdown now. I looked back at the previous correspondence and they sent out a leaflet that showed you what we should expect. And they said that the direct cost to local council, one-off costs, is £390 for the uniform, equipment and mobile phone handset, £50 for the secure fob for remote IT access, £50 advertising and other recruitment material, recurring annual costs, £50 access to out-of-hours logging on and off system, £410 for the mobile phone line rental and expenses, an average, £125 for training, excluding any training provided by KCC or partners. Our total for 2 years, they were saying, was £1,660. So they said year 1 was £1,075 and year 2 £585. So we are now being asked to pay the £782.50 because it was only part of the year. And then it's confirmed that £585 will be next year. So that is the information we were given at the beginning, and that's what the invoice is for.
Okay.
So really, it's a pity it's taken them so long. We have paid less than we originally envisaged for the year because we haven't had a year, and we've had even a bit less than they've charged it from August, and of course we're in December now. But the fact is, we should look at the fact that we are where we wanted to be, which is that we've got a volunteer warden eventually ready to go, and we've put ourselves on the front foot by being one of the few villages that have got one. Okay, so Yvonne, I think you're going to pay that invoice because we agreed it. It's not on the agenda, but we agreed it in principle last time. We just for the same amount. We just hadn't had the invoice coming in the post. Okay. So now we're on to planning applications, and the first one is Underhill Orchard. Who would like to talk about that?
It actually seems a good move. Get rid of that building and make it into, with somebody using the land.
You do.
It's sensible.
Sure. George?
I don't know, to be honest. I'm sort of torn. I agree with Sue in terms of if you're going to do something there, then that's a good thing. So, but I'm not sort of totally decided, to be honest, at the moment. So.
Alan?
I'd like to go and have a look, and I haven't, I'm afraid, done that, just to look at the building. But in essence, I agree with Sue, and it's rather nice to see an old Wittersham family coming back to the village, because I remember Tom Stadwell.
Can I
30 or 40 years. No, 30
I
years
should have done this earlier, and I'll adjourn the meeting so you can give me the answer to the question. What is the relationship, because I looked at the plans and I've forgotten, what's the relationship between the size of building that you will finish up with and the size of the shed that's there at the moment? Is it the same, or is it enlarged? But it's the same, same footprint. Okay.
Same height, width.
Okay, I think that's very helpful.
Yeah.
All right, my view is that I am very comfortable with it being done. In the absence of criticism from neighbours. There's always the question of us trying to balance different people's interests. There's no criticism from neighbours that we're aware of. I'm therefore happy to see it done because it brings a building that's not being used into use. It helps you to farm, which is productive enterprise, albeit it might be marginal, but it's productive. And last but not least, and I think we have to keep our mind on this, we are expected nationally, regionally, borough-wide and locally to be increasing the number of houses. Now it happens that we have got a controversial application not a controversial application, a controversial proposal from Ashford to put 40 over by the Lloyd's Green Woodland View area. But irrespective of that, when we have an opportunity to find a place to put a house, we ought to do it. And if it's going in place of a farm building, I'm happy to see that. I think it's inconsistent logically to say, oh, we don't want it. You know, we all want houses, but oh no, there's always a reason we can't put one anywhere. So I support it. Sue's supporting it. Alan hasn't looked at it, and George is thinking.
Yeah, George. Yeah.
No, I am in theory supporting it.
You're supporting it.
Yes.
Okay.
George has thought, and I think he's happy to support it in terms of the fact it's replacing existing building,
Yeah.
unlike something else we may look at later where it's a new building.
Exactly.
and a
Oh,
new
that
piece
is
of
that
ground.
is different. I
That's
agree.
the big difference to me
I
in
do agree.
terms of
I do agree. That is different.
all the other factors that come in.
So it's making use, and in fact there are government policies on using agricultural
Yes,
buildings. So in fact we're unanimous, albeit we're a bit depleted, but we're unanimous to we can't approve that. We are supporting it.
Yes.
It's up to Ashford as the planning authority whether they give it or not, and they have to take account of our view, but they don't have to follow our view. They can take account of it and then disagree. Okay? But they have to ask us and they have to note what we think, and we will think that we support it. Okay, thank you very much. You're very welcome to stay for as long as you want tonight, but don't feel you have to. But if it is gripping, then feel free. We like the company. We like the company. Okay, that's good, thank you. So the next one is the Tilehouse Farm, Stocks Road. I have a view, but let's wait till other people. George, is it your turn?
Yeah, I think I was a lone voice last time we voted on it and decided, and I was saying I didn't support it, and I think to me the fact whether we're talking about 10 houses, 3 houses, 2 houses or 1 house doesn't really make much difference to the principles that I was talking about before in terms of the AONMB and part of the Wittersham conservation area and the extending the land onto the agriculture, all those things that I've well rehearsed and rehearsed.
You did say that last time. In fact, you actually also said last time that you couldn't understand why you'd supported it the previous time.
No, I didn't. I obviously fell asleep during that meeting.
But you did. You were against 2,
Yeah.
and therefore
I'm still
completely
against.
logical to be against 1.
Yeah.
Sue?
I'm going to support it.
It's fine.
I think some of the comments that the inspector has put in the appeal make it feasible that 1 could get through. And I have to support it.
Sorry, say that again.
Some of the
reason
comments that the
he put.
inspector put
Yeah,
in the appeal
yeah.
is indicating he's not totally against it to me.
Oh, I see what you mean. I thought you said about 3. I misheard one of your words. You think that in terms of work to go to the inspector yet again,
Yes,
it could slip through on 1.
I think so. I could be wrong, but that's my feeling. But I
Okay.
would support.
But you're supporting.
Mm.
I'm not sure I quite agree with Sue that that should be a reason for
Oh, no.
supporting it, because I think if we, for instance, say we're going to support it because the inspector might
Oh,
support
no,
it
no,
this
no.
time.
No, but to be fair, Sue supported 3 and she supported 2.
Yes, indeed. And I'm conscious also that to be consistent at this council is probably quite important, and we did support it last time and the time before. And with everything that Jeremy has already said about housing in the village and so on, I'm with you. I would support it.
Okay.
And you know, just well, yes, I've supported it.
I'm actually very conflicted. I supported 3. I supported 2. And you might think it's rather strange that I'm unhappy with 1. It is odd. However, since the 2, certainly since the 3, Ashford have put the 40 in. So the logic that I first put to the council way back when John was still in this seat chairing it and I sat where George is as the vice chairman, I suggested that if we were arguing, and Ashford was also arguing, that we should grow through small infill, then we couldn't turn down small infill when there was 1 presented to us. that argument is unpicked if Ashford now, it's probably gone through the Cabinet last week, but I don't know, and it'll probably go through the Council this week. It's then up to the inspector next year as to whether the 40 stays in or not. But if the 40 survives, we don't know if they'll ever get built, but if they survive, then we rather lose our argument for infill. That said, but actually our argument against the 40 was to say we want to go back to the infill. That was the one we put in as the response to the plan, and we argued that pretty solidly, which incidentally Ashford don't seem to have taken much account of in their responses. My other anxiety is this. I'm afraid all this is very convoluted. If Ashford now, whether or not we say anything, whatever we say, if Ashford now were to consent one, then in my view, and I probably won't be popular with this, especially with the neighbours, and I'm sorry for that, I think it would be outrageous that they didn't consent to. And that is because, and not because I want to do anything for the developers, but because there's space for two. And if we're supposed to be building houses, we don't take a very large plot and put one house on it, and the grounds that we don't like 2 and we don't like 3, and it's got this reason, that reason, and the other reason. You either go ahead and you don't allow any, big cheers over there, and big cheers from George, or you have a proper number on the site that's available. Now, this council always felt that the first 3 was over squashed and we rejected it. The second application for 3 we decided we could stomach, if I put it that way. It wasn't great with them sort of stacked around, but it was doable. 2 was better, it was actually the best of them. And 1 seems to me to say, it's a bit like, if I draw a parallel, it's a bit like Lloyd's Green. When Lloyd's Green was built in the 50s, whoever was in charge of it then was unbelievably profligate. They said, well, we want to build 40 houses or something, we've got a field this side, so we'll put them around the edge. You know, and they took away the space to put another 20 houses in when they were ready to. And I'm fearful that if they were to consent 1, they'd be doing the same thing. Sadly, it's nothing to do with us one way or the other. It's everything to do with us, but you know, Ashford will take a limited amount of notice of us. They'll either decide to go for the 1 for fear of losing the appeal, or they will hold to the end and they may lose the appeal anyway. I'm just sad if that's what happens, that they get 1 instead of 2. For the neighbours, no question, 1 would be better because it moves the house further away from their boundary. Totally understand, totally, I sympathise with that. I've been in that situation before in Sevenoaks. But I just think that we ought to be focusing on principles as well and saying, if there's a bit of land this size, incidentally, if you look at the Ashford plan for the 40 houses, they make it clear that they're putting the right number on there. You know, 40 is about the right number for the size of the site and all this sort of thing. And 1 plainly is, you know, it's going to be 1 with the biggest garden in Wittersham. Well, not quite, but you know, it's going to be big. No, Miriam's is bigger. And so I'm actually torn, and I think we can only argue, we can only actually respond to the one in front of us, and therefore, though we may make comments about how we preferred 2, there's only the one that we can answer. Of course, if it isn't built on, it can always come back again later with another application, although the neighbours may have managed to buy it by then. And of course, that's the other side of it, and it's probably Miriam's side too. Is it right to lose that plot, not only to not put enough houses on it, but to lose the genuine value of the plot, which is nice. It's nice to the neighbours. It's not so nice to the public because they don't see it over the big hedge, but that may always change. You know, it's got ecological value. It might grow apple trees again. It's got value. Is it right to lose it just for 1 house? So I'm on that decision.
Go for it.
I think I'm actually going to object. but I'm outnumbered. So the council will. The council will.
Two steamboat.
Oh, sorry, you stayed.
Yeah.
Yes, no, it's your vote now, so it's
Yeah.
2-2.
Right, okay. So in
Yeah.
fact, it's objected to, and we will have to explain that. You're right. Thank you. It is objected to, and it'll have to be explained in our response, which, in a way, is just a cul-de-sac because they've not got an application for 2 in front of them. They're either going to say to hell with it, we can't be bothered. You know, we'll either not do anything or we'll do 1. But we are being consistent in our terms.
Yeah.
George is very consistent, except for when he forgot.
So the flow of this. So if we go back to ABC with this and saying that we supported 2, but we now don't support 1, is there any comeback on the 2 application?
No, it's not. It's not
So,
confronted.
and would the developer logically be able to resubmit a tour?
Not anytime soon, because obviously he's got the inspector against him. I mean, he could, but it's a bit of a waste of time.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
And I believe, I've been told this, but I don't know how the rules work. Miriam might know more. I believe that it would be thrown out automatically by Ashford unless there was a material change.
Yes, yes. That's
And they have to argue the value of the change. So it would be like going through Ashford's reasons to object, let alone the inspectors, and say, we have dealt with this, this, this and this.
Yep.
And as long as Ashford is saying it's in the conservation area, well, it still is. It's in
Nothing's
the AONB,
changed.
it still is, etc. But on the other hand, what has changed is that Ashford has suddenly decided that building 40 in the AONB is all right after all. It is just a complete muddle, shambles. But there we are. Okay, so it's you've got what you wanted.
Not yet.
They're not allowed to say that.
They're not allowed to say that, but we know. Okay, good. They never did say anything. Okay, that's the second planning application, and the same is true. You're welcome to stay for the amusement, and indeed the crisps and the peanuts. So we now move on to discuss the result of the meeting with Invicta Law and decide how to proceed. Let me catch up with my papers. So you've all had the note I sent out on the Invicta Law return scheme. I'll wait for George to come back so he's able to concentrate on it.
Just have to drink it myself.
Oh, no.
I did try.
Thank you. So Yvonne and I went 30th of November, week before last, and met the 2 heads of section, as I reported in the paper. They gave us a lot of time. I think it would be fair to say probably more than they intended to, but they were fine. Yvonne and I, talking on the way back in the car, I think concluded that it was a sensible thing to do. I have this, he can't vote, but I did speak to Colin when he rang me up to send his apologies, and I asked him what his views were on it, and he said he thought it was perfectly fine. It's partly defensive, but we also know that we've got to do something about the decision to go with registering the land, and they said, well, they did register KCC's land when it came up for being done, and there must have been a lot of it, so they do know how to do it. And I had thought it was £200 because we have less than 1,000 electors, but it's actually residents, and we're just over 1,000, so it'll be £300.
Okay.
But we do then get a cheap rate for anything we pay for compared to typical. And we also get up to half an hour free on 3 different issues a year, plus the training up to 3 seminars a year and things like that. So from my point of view, I think it's a way of getting us somebody on site.
So it's a good value for money.
It's not, as I stressed in the paper, that's not to downgrade what we get from CAP advisor,
No.
but that is on a sort of more administrative level. Sometimes it's legal, but he's not a lawyer, he doesn't go to lawyers typically. This is someone who could go into bat on our behalf if we needed. So we agreed that we're going to sign up to that. Okay,
Sounds good.
that's all done, good.
Looks good.
The next one then is the cemetery, where after all these delays we're ready to actually start getting on with it. You've seen what is in the paper. There are a few odds and ends, loose ends, but essentially we've got a quote of £12.50 plus VAT, we get the VAT back, for felling the 4 trees from the same people who did the hedge at Carnation Field, and we think did a nice job.
Yes.
They've quoted to do that. They are normally tree people rather than hedge people, I think, but so that's fine for them. We would normally go for more quotes, as I've explained in the paper. That's what, if Yvonne was just going off and doing something, she'd need to get more. The council can decide, although it's in our normal regulations that we would do that, we can decide to override them if we resolve to do it. We could do with getting on with it because the weather is going to get worse and they're afraid of the place getting muddier. They've also quoted for fencing, but my personal feeling is that's more money again, and I think fencing is more generic. And it's got sort of more done by the meter rather than people coming along and spending their time figuring it all out. So I don't think I would jump on that one straight away. But we've also got the quote from Dave Ward, who's worked for the council before doing different jobs, £8.50 to do the preparation of the new triangle. He quoted that about a year ago, and he's held to the same price. He's reconfirmed it.
You can also quote for stock proofing.
Stockproof fence as well, which we haven't asked him for.
So you say preparing, it's the getting out the roots and levelling and narrowing
yes,
and
I
doing
think
all
it's
those
flailing,
things.
flailing, derooting, ploughing,
It's
power harrowing.
flailing off of grass and tree suckers, subsoiling and ripping out through the ground and disposal of roots ready for ploughing, ploughing of land, power harrowing of ploughed land to level and flatten, optional rolling of power harrowed land to consolidate.
And that's included.
That sounds quite
The
reasonable.
one thing we haven't got is the grass,
No.
No.
which will need seeding, and I don't know if he does that or not, and we don't know how much it'll cost.
I didn't like to ask him that until
It won't be done
if we
straight
said
away
yes,
anyway, will it?
if
Yeah,
we said
no.
yes to this, then I can say, so
Yeah.
how much would you?
Yeah.
But I couldn't say, ask him that if we wasn't going to
The
get this.
suggestion is we've got to get it grassed because otherwise the weeds will take over. But if it's rolled and grassed, then Alf can mow it.
Yeah. Bind it into it as well.
And it'll
Yes,
make
because
it
I also asked Alf about seeding, and he said that you can get something from Listers that will, one of the machines that will sort of distribute it,
Yeah.
or it can be done with by hand. And there's different sorts of grass, and he was recommending a ryegrass, I think it was, we used.
Yeah.
So he knows the stuff as
Tougher.
well.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're approving the tree care one, and the same applies today, that we're just taking a single quote there.
Yes.
Can I propose in second, please?
Yes, we better do that. So
Yeah.
George is proposing both of them and Sue's seconding them. Thank you. And we have got to get the fence done once the ground is prepared.
Yeah.
And my reckoning, as I explained in the note, is that the fence can then be done as the last job from the field side. We've got an informal approval through Willie to go in from the orchard side, but we have an obligation to get it then fenced off. Once it's fenced off, we've also got to then plant a hedge. We're under an obligation to on our side.
Yeah.
I'm led to believe by Alf that can probably be done bare rooted, which means it won't take a lot of machinery. It'll just be making holes, digging in.
That's all right.
Is that right?
push it in. Yeah.
So with luck, you know, sometime in the spring or the summer or whatever, we'll have all that done, and we'll be a lot further forward than we are now. The last thing then, the biggest single job, will be the paving. There's the paving to get across to the boundary, which we know about and we've talked about before. But there's also got to be, when I say paving, I'm using the term loop hardening.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we've got to have, by some stage, we've done a design of what we want the other side to make the use of the space. We know in principle, but we haven't laid it out on a, you know, carefully drawn. And we've obviously got to start hardening a bit of that, otherwise you're sort of going to come across the old cemetery and drop straight into a ploughed field, well, not a ploughed field, you know, but a field.
A muddy field.
There will have to be a bit more done. And that is going to cost us. Okay. So I think that's all we needed on the cemetery.
Yeah.
Progress reports from councillors on voices reports. If we just look a little bit here, if there is very much to say, I don't know. I took over David Green's on communications, and the first one we come to comment on is the Wi-Fi for the village hall, and we know that there was a problem because it never worked. I gather, George, that may have gone backwards since then.
Well, what we're doing, I think we may well be cancelling the one we've got. It's been cancelled, and we're actually physically going to move and look. Steve Schuriger is going to look into other possibilities how we could get Wi-Fi into the building rather than having the reflector on the roof. Because he feels we might be able to do it in a different way. And then we've decided that this is the room where meetings happen, so this would be the room you need the Wi-Fi rather than the main hall. So whatever we do in future, we're going to put it in here. So,
so it's in a sort of a
it's moving forward.
It's in a hiatus between the system that didn't work and a new system that you think will work.
I don't think it was a system that didn't work, it was just in the wrong place.
Yes. There was too much too much priority put on locking it in the cupboard.
Yeah, I think so.
Whereas if it had been up there, it probably wouldn't get nicked anyway. Right, got you. The outlook on Oxley magazine. I have talked to Sue as treasurer and to Tola Miriam, the editor, about having a meeting with their team at some point. It obviously wasn't going to happen before Christmas, but we need to come back to that. I think it's probably fair to say that the committee isn't going to be very keen on it, but I think that we ought to do it just to explore what is possible and indeed what help can be given. It may not get anywhere, but I think we've got to try. The notice boards, they're going to stay the same, other than the fact that we're budgeted, or we're talking about budgeting for a new notice board in one instance. And the mobile phone coverage, we know about this problem with the mast. So that's the communications bit. Anything on neighbourhood care, Sue?
I don't think so.
I'm a bit at sea, and it's the wrong time to be talking to her. I need to really, I think, to talk to Judy again, and perhaps Roger, to try and figure out. I've been to 2 seminars. The one with Judy, where we went to the KCC, helping the community thing, and then where we made some contacts if Judy wants to try and organise something on transport to hospital and things like that. And then Roger here and I went to the KCC seminar on community bus services and what's available there, and the Wheel the Wheels business and all of that, which is a different angle altogether. And I've also been off to the Tenterden Day Centre, where they introduced themselves to Roger and I, saying that they want to start introducing the bus and Meals on Wheels into the villages. So there are a few things moving, or potentially moving. The question is what on earth we're actually trying to do, and who, and how, and when, and what with, and how do they relate. It's a bit of a mishmash, and
the daycare centre buses are being maybe used in Tenterden as well,
Yeah.
because of the problems they probably going to have with the buses.
Yeah.
So Tenterden are
Right.
latching onto that as well.
Right, okay. Yes, their problem is that they get a big grant from KCC that is being hammered,
Yeah.
and they've got to find some money.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with the day centre when I went there.
Mm.
I mean, I had no idea it was as big or as
Mm.
encompassing, and the number of staff it's got and volunteers are massive. Okay, transport is Paul's, so we don't get an answer there. Local amenities, George.
Yeah, I mean the one I was still trying to push was the youth club one,
Yeah.
and with my other hat on, we've got this room available on a Friday evening, in the whole building actually on a Friday evening, should somebody wish to open a youth club,
Right.
and we've offered them a discount as well. So.
Oh,
So I'm just waiting to hear back from Andrea, who said she was going to Ashford Borough Council to see if there's any help available from them. So
Do you know if they've had any interest or not?
from young
From the
people.
youth.
Well, yeah, they put something in the magazine,
I don't know.
didn't they?
I don't know.
You don't know.
She
No.
hasn't come back to me at all. So.
No. Oh, right.
Okay. No Colin. Alan on the environment.
I don't think I've got anything to add at this point. Have we got anything, Robbie? No. We don't.
I don't see anything about to pop out here, other than you persuading your ex-colleagues, obviously, to move a surgery down here.
It's never going to happen these days, because centralisation is the popular part of medical practice, rather than
Indeed.
distributing it to the provinces.
I know. When Canterbury hasn't got an A&E, we're not going to get a surgery.
They could do it on a Tuesday morning when the market's on, just screen off a corner.
Happily or otherwise, it's not my decision. It's one of the privileges of being yesterday's man.
Okay, I won't say what I was going to say. Most unfair. Okay, the next one then, thanks for that. The next one then is the forward task list and draft for 2018. Now, I just knocked this out off the back of, back of a fact packet. Some of them are the ones that have been coming steadily. Some I've dropped off because they're not going to happen, particularly the drains. There's no point in fussing over it. And then I thought of one or two extras, which I've put here. Does anyone have anything else that they want to... Well, shall I go through what's here first, I suppose? Victor Law we've dealt with. Registering land holdings, that will happen now. Branding the PC assets is something that we need to decide how we do it, but it will come along with the registration, I think. The churchyard wall we know will happen when we've got the best quote. Night, Roger. Thank you for coming. And Valerie. The SIDS we're waiting on grant responses. Voices we've made progress as best we can. The FAQs and useful contacts, well, we've got the useful contacts, we just need responses from you guys on FAQs.
Or not.
Someone thought it was going to be a really good idea. And I spent a while writing them. Prepare land for bringing into use as a cemetery, we've talked about enough, but it's obviously the big thing for next year. It would be the big thing any year. Renovating the bus shelter, we need a survey to establish exactly what has to be done. Alpha's taken a look at it. It may not be too bad, but some things do need to be done. Completing the agreed work on the green and carnation field. The key there now is the holly tree, planting some new hedges in order to take out little bits of the old ones the way we discussed already, and most importantly the path, which will be expensive, but I don't think we can tackle the path until we've got through the cemetery and know where we stand there.
Yes.
We don't want to either distract ourselves or bite off more than we can chew. Although when we get to the budget, I think financially we're in good shape, but there's no point taking an unnecessary chance by doing two things at once.
I had an idea that I'm going to take to the British Legion on Thursday, where we were talking about having the gap in the hedge
Yeah.
where the memorial is, to
Yeah.
have a commemorative gate
Oh, right.
with 1418 on, or Lest You Forget, or something like
Yeah.
that. So rather than just leave it as a gap.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to see what the...
But a see-through gate.
Yes, yeah, just a,
So
this
it'll be a
wide, not a
bigger-
big gate, no, just a pedestrian gate, not a...
I thought we were going to have a bigger
We
gap
were gonna
than
have
a
a
Well, we can have a
gate.
bigger, 2 gates then. But it just the idea of something, rather than just leave it as a gap. Perhaps we could say that in this centenary year coming up, 2018, we put that up as the village, you know, based on
Gate
village
is a possible.
contributions.
Gate is possible, and I like the idea.
Yeah.
But another possibility, I'm just thinking of bigger memorial gardens elsewhere. Pillars,
Or something.
two pillars, which of course could be put in,
So-
and just mark something.
But I'll talk to the Legion on Thursday to see
Okay.
what they think.
It is the sort of thing that somebody would sponsor.
Yeah, well, that's
in,
what I thought.
in memory of a
Or just
family member. isn't it?
general
Or
public
something.
donations and...
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, pillars might go quite well. The only thing is, of course, I tell you what, we'd have to get approval for the pillars because we're right next door to a Grade 2
Okay,
listed,
Yeah.
which is the monument.
we'll go for the
But who
gates.
knows? Well, the gates would be the same, wouldn't it? Who knows? Okay. Additional names on the war memorial. I know I had Dave Fletch
Yeah, certainly.
call me the other day to remind me of what he said about a year ago. I think we, as I put it here, we've got to have a submission and we've got to find out what the relevant approvals are.
And we've got some extra names, have we?
Yeah, there are
Yeah,
one or two
one or two
that,
missing.
that the research has indicated that. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll say the 1 or 2
One or
missing.
two.
So
but
we
then
do we know who they are?
They know
Dave
who they
does.
are.
Dave does.
Well,
I
they,
think,
well,
for
they presumably
instance-
don't because they're not around, but
Yeah.
somebody knows who they are.
Yeah. No, I mean the people who bought them.
Yeah.
I think one of them is someone who died of the wounds back in England or something, and there were various issues and rules that George is closer to,
Yes.
and I presume that there is the British Legion and the MOD and the war graves or something are all going to have to say, yeah, they're all comfortable with the research, rather than us just chip it out of the memorial one day because we think it's a good idea.
I think we need to move on with it because again, it'd be good to have that done for,
Yes.
for centenary.
At the time of
Remember
the
of
First
staying
World War,
on
if you
November.
were, I'll put this diplomatically, if you were executed by your own
They
side,
didn't go on at the time.
no, whether we don't know, but perhaps we should research whether Wittersham did have anybody like that, and they indeed should be
I
added
don't
on.
think any of them have come up. I think it's more like this one I mentioned that died of wounds back here.
Yes, but you can see that at the end of the First World War, if that did happen, people wouldn't have been added on, and there must be an awful lot of omissions
I
around
don't
the
think there
country.
were that many that were shot in
I think there were-
action.
I think in the First World War there were a lot.
I'll mention it.
Spread across millions.
I'll mention it today.
Yeah.
Just so
You know, a few hundred, put it like that, and
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
you can bet your bottom dollar there's some in Kent. I mean, like in every country.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, you're right to say that to the extent that the rules apply, whichever one it is, they ought to be applied.
And because recently that's been such a big issue, and
Yes.
we should make every attempt to ensure that they are added on.
Yes.
I mean, that's
Fair point. Okay. The last one then is the works that might improve the village green, including the proposed pond renovation. That's just a wet finger. Again, we've got to get the cemetery through first. We've talked a lot about the pond before. As it happens, Mavis's view of the pond was to leave it as it is, which was quite surprising because we were afraid that she would say, how's it been allowed to get into such a mess? But, I personally would like to see the pond turned into something nice, but this is not the moment. It's on the list, not to be forgotten, but it's not the priority while we've got the cemetery and the path for road safety to deal with.
Yeah.
I also glossed over, and I just put this in as a wet finger again, and caused Yvonne to have conniptions. Branding the PC assets. I said, should we seek to adopt the church car park? That was just a wild question. I gather
that
no
comes
one
up
knows
every
who
few
owns
years,
it.
doesn't it? And,
It may well be that we want to run away from it.
what we have done in the past.
Yes,
or-
I just put it down for our
No.
own
Why are you
benefit.
shaking your head
It's
so
managed all this
violently?
time
No.
without it. So.
Trouble, I think.
It's certainly trouble, but then isn't that what we're here for, to
Yes.
deal with trouble?
Yeah.
I think because it's trouble, we shouldn't run away, but it's trouble undoubtedly.
Yes.
She's afraid of us getting her a yellow hat and a machine for putting tickets on cars.
It's Paul suggested that in the past, you know.
It's
But
come up
I don't think
before.
that would
It's
go
been
down
in
well.
my time, it's come up a few times.
I don't think that would
Okay.
ever be popular in the
So
village.
no one's
We'd
thinking
never
about
get away with it.
I'm not
Not
suggesting
at the
tickets
moment.
really, I'm just suggesting whether we should adopt it in order to, while if we're branding, while if we're registering land, there is the question as to if that is.
If we were a wealthy parish council, certainly to improve the quality of the church car park would be a jolly good thing to do. And if we can ever see that we will have the money, then we should adopt it.
It's not bad actually, when you say the quality. I mean, it's.
Well, the brickwork's all up and all over the place and stuff.
If
isn't it?
we adopt it, all of a sudden there'll be lots of things needed doing
Exactly.
to it.
You're
I'm
right.
sure.
There is all that. There's all that to it.
Yeah.
I think it's very odd that the highways don't regard it as theirs.
So they took one look and ran a mile.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Well, okay, well I've raised it.
stop it. But
So does anyone have anything else to add on the end of that?
I think we just should, perhaps not now, but in the future, consider adopting it. I think that's.
Well, it is, Joe.
It's on the list.
Yeah.
Yes.
Should we? That's it.
I think we should.
So we can have another discussion.
I think not today, but I think seriously we shouldn't dismiss it out of hand. I would.
I
want
think
to
other
discuss
than
it again.
things that urgently need repairing, replacing, I think our focus is the cemetery, and we need to.
Oh, it's only for a later.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. So
Yeah. Okay.
much later.
Anything else that I should be adding on the bottom? Other good ideas, please.
Well, that's what I meant. I think we've got enough with the cemetery. That's
Right.
Well, yes.
once we've done
And
that,
the
we can add a
path
few more
going
things
through,
on.
yes.
Alan?
Well, the things I emailed Yvonne
Oh
about
yes.
the other
I'm
day.
sorry.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
right. You're right.
Now, whether they should be in this section or not.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying
I
I'm
have
particularly.
actually put it on the next piece of
I'm not
paper.
particularly pushing for them, but they
No.
just were brought to my attention.
No, I'm sorry. I should have raised it myself and I forgot. So, Alan has sent in 3, which have come in from residents, and they're all interesting. They would all be nice to haves. The first one is someone saying we don't have any Christmas lights in the village. Well, we do, of course, a lot in the houses, but we don't have any of
I think
ours.
municipal.
Indeed. Municipal Christmas lights in the
Whether
village.
we want them, I mean, I'm not terribly keen on Christmas lights myself,
Tenterden
but
is said to look very glitzy this year. Actually, I think Tenterden is fantastic. This
it
year.
is. It does look
They've
very
done
nice.
beautiful. It's a very good idea the way they put the white lights in the trees and nothing more
It,
gaudy.
it is done very
Oh
tastefully.
yeah, it's very
And there's no doubt about it, it is effective and it
Yeah,
does
good
make
job.
the town look really quite jazzy.
Oh yeah.
We're a little
Yeah.
village.
So if we work on the same scale, we'd have a couple of lights in one tree, really.
Yeah.
Our contribution.
Yes, yes.
The oak tree is beautiful. In the green.
Anyway.
Now you can
So
But I
that was
think
the first one.
But I mean, I suspect the Chamber of Commerce does it because it's in their
I'm sure
interest.
they do.
Now, I mean, all right, the Chamber of Commerce is intense, and does it have any responsibility to the outlying villages? And why shouldn't it?
Well, it could do. We've also got, of course, the Isle of Oxney Business Forum, although I think that's a bit moribund now.
I think it is, yes. I doubt it had any money.
Yes. Sure.
Maybe there may be a secret bank account.
We've probably forgotten the number. Okay, so that's one that was raised. The second one is the lack of communal playground equipment for children. Now, of course, we do have. a
Yes, of
communal
course. I
playground.
just lost sight of where it had gone, and it had disappeared off the radar
not
because
moved.
it's round the
I mean,
back.
It moved a
now.
long time ago. It's not moved since. It's over by where
It
Lee lives.
is, yes, indeed. When it used when my children were small, you used to be able to go and play there, and then suddenly they weren't there anymore.
Oh, you're thinking of when it was in Coronation
Yes.
Field?
Yes.
It moved.
Yes, indeed. I
I think
thought it had
so,
just
so.
been simply replaced with adult equipment. You see.
Well, it moved to where the majority of children were. I guess
Exactly,
that's
yeah.
the issue. And
Well, it was actually to do with also Ashford's doing the clever, as they thought, clever plan with KCC to move the village green. So having moved the village green, but it didn't actually move legally to the far corner, they stuck the playground equipment in it to say, look, here's the village green, but it just didn't happen. My wife has said that she's had 2 people in the village that she's had to explain to them when they asked, when she's been walking the dog, where the children's play area is.
Well, that's my
And so
next
it could
point.
have it could have a sign on it.
Exactly. So I think there should be. I mean, my daughters, for instance, and I discussed this with her just before I came here. and she's lived in the village for 35 years on
She
and
didn't
off.
know.
And she didn't think there was anything because she's got young children, and a sign to acquaint people of where it is would perhaps be appropriate. Would there be any objection to that generally? Do you think in the village having a sign to, or is that going to diminish the village in some way? But I mean, would a sign be a good thing?
Well, we've got other signs. We've got the one to Owen Court that's been stuck across the road
That's
now.
very strange.
And well, it's because they had so much rowing over where they could put it. Although the people who own the house have allowed one to be stuck on their wall now.
So what would it say? Children's playground?
Because the other way is to actually, assuming we want to, publicise it. I mean, I don't really understand this idea that people don't know where it is. I live just opposite here, and with my daughter, I mean, I've only been here 2 years, and my daughter was 2, and I found it, and all her friends up here found it, and they all go there. It's not.
I'm
an
sorry,
issue,
Rich, but on the edge of the village, you know, you would drive through and.
But you wouldn't come here, would you? From the any more than you go there, I guess. That's just as close to you
Yes.
from the edge of the village. Yeah.
I just didn't know it was there, and so I'm pleased to know it is there, but I think there are people around who have no idea.
All you've got left in the field now is the mound where the slide was, isn't it? That's still there.
The mugger's there,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
There's the mugger there.
Oh, and the mugger, yeah.
And the mug's there, yes. Yeah.
So a sign, I think, is not a bad idea if we can agree.
Yeah.
A sign at
Something
least. There
interesting.
is the issue as to whether we would ever want to put children's equipment back into Coronation Field, but that would be up to us, and it would be again an issue as when
So you
draw the breath after the cemetery.
would that be a proposal to move it, or would that be a proposal
No,
to
it's
have
not
additional?
ours.
It's
It's
not
not
Ashford
ours.
Council.
It's Ashford's.
Would that be a proposal to put additional in?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ashford's. It's Ashford's housing department, I believe, that owns the stuff that's over in the corner of near the village green, and that was, as I said, to try and put an accent on the idea that it was the village green, even though it wasn't. And it was also, of course, because the housing department was hoping to get the 27 houses through the rest of the place.
Yes.
Okay, let's just, before I introduce you, Mike, let me just finish this third one on this sheet. So the third one then is the point that's been made to Alan about Wolverhampton Parish Council running a yearly drinks party at Christmas for new residents.
We didn't quite finish the last one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, you're right. Comparison with even very small villages which may have tennis courts. And Wolverhampton and Wolverhampton Lane have designated children's play areas. Well, we've got a designated children's play area. The tennis courts is an issue that's been talked about at the sports club.
Yes.
And that would depend upon them, if ever, getting their act together in terms of financially getting onto a better basis than they are at the moment. And we're all hopeful that that's going to get established again.
Just that somebody had said to me who lives in Sussex, you know, that they couldn't believe that Wittersham didn't have its own tennis court because, you know, quote, every small village in Sussex has. And do you mean? And I said, well, you know, sorry, in Kent we don't, but there you are.
In some ways, I suppose, Alan, there's a lot of things in terms of supply and demand, and the demand is partly taken out, I think, in this village by a lot of people playing on the Mallets court, isn't there?
And other ones. Yeah.
And others are there, right?
Yes, I know. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, right, and then the third one was the drinks party at Christmas. I think it would be a nice idea, not necessarily this, if we did more to welcome new arrivals to the village, and that's something we would have to get our minds around better. Judy tries in terms of finding out who is there, and then something that happens. Judy has a welcome.
I'm not sure whether the audience will know what we're talking about yet.
Wolverhampton Parish, yes, you said, you took me back to the previous one.
I did, but I don't know.
Wolverhampton Parish Council runs at Christmas a yearly drinks party for new residents of the parish, to which each new household is individually invited. I know that we have tomorrow's drinks to which anyone can come, a slightly different concept.
Yes.
Now, the idea of individually inviting new arrivals, whether you wait until Christmas, you know, the first thing to do would be to have more understanding of who is new and welcome them into the village.
I mean, presumably, Yvonne, do you get that information? Who does get that information? There must
Nobody.
be
Nobody.
Information.
there must be a way of collating it somehow to get to know who's moving into a
I think
village.
it's only neighbours.
It's only if it's a neighbour,
and
isn't it?
the question is
The
whether
risk is
neighbours
there that
report
somebody
it on.
key would be omitted by mistake, isn't it?
I think if we do the same as we do now, that every Christmas we do this, but make sure that if we know of people, we invite them to come along. Because they're either going to have moved in like the people opposite in the last 2 weeks in David's old house, or they might be 11 months ago.
Yes.
If it's just every Christmas.
But you see, if we were to speculatively invite anybody by sending them an invitation, then it would be difficult to choose. If they're new to the village, that's a good reason to send them an invitation.
Well, everybody is invited.
But then how many do we get? So, if you're singled out, then you're more likely to come, aren't you?
The question seems to be that there are sort of two parts to it, if you like. One is the opportunity, and I've done it in some cases, like the houses around the shop. I went and spoke to all of them when they moved in, telling them what's where, getting a pack from Judy, explaining to them about the market, about where the church was, about where the war memorial was, about where the play area was, about, and just being welcoming. And then the other side of it, which tonight is a little bit more about, and we can see how they all flock in, is to know a little bit more about the parish council. And of course, to most people in the village as residents, the parish council and the residents have a glancing relationship where we might matter to them occasionally. Sometimes we matter to them more than they realise, but it is only occasional. They've got their lives to lead otherwise, their jobs to do.
Well, I met new people in the UNL the other Tuesday at the market. They were sitting close by and asked what I was doing. And I said to them, well, you must come. Come and just find out what we do. And they couldn't come this week, but they did say they would come in the new year. But they didn't, I don't know. But that was, if I do see people, it's...
Indeed.
Yeah.
I do the walking thing and I do the parish council.
They did come to church a couple of weeks ago
Yeah.
and introduced themselves, saying they're the people from...
I think we've got the means through the
Okay.
church,
So they are
through the
getting
Outlook on
about.
Oxney, through websites, etc., to
Yeah.
make people aware that we're here and they can come.
Right, well, Alan's put his note through. We can come back to all of those three another time, but they're kind of on the table. So, Mike, thank you very much for coming. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
For the people who don't know, this is Mike Hill, who's the county councillor for this area, including Tenterden, and also a cabinet member of Kent County Council.
Yes.
And also responsible.
Still there.
And also, indeed, and also responsible for community services, or works to that effect.
Yep.
And in particular, a young lady in the white top is your new volunteer warden.
Ah, we haven't met, have we? No, good.
That's the new Helen.
Hi, Lee. Hi.
So, as I say, welcome. Now, you wanted particularly to talk to us about buses, but anything else with that?
Well, I asked to come here tonight, and thank you very much for inviting me, because there's been such a lot of heat and not a lot of light about buses over the last week or two. I thought it was probably worth trying to explain what is actually happening rather than what you read about, which is not the same thing at all. So I have in the last week gone around all my 7 parishes and tried to explain to them what is happening. I've been to Wolverhampton already this evening, where I ran into a bit of a storm, not about buses but about Haldon Lane, which is causing an enormous amount of problems there. Anyway, buses. It has caused a lot of problem, I'm aware, largely due to a very erroneous reporting in the media that we were going to close down routes all over Kent and the whole thing was a disaster area and it's all going to be closed down by the nasty county council. Well, that's nonsense. We don't run any buses. We don't run routes. It's operators that close down routes if they are indeed closed down. All we do is subsidise some of the services. So we're not responsible for closures. And if indeed we did withdraw subsidy, it doesn't necessarily follow that anything will close at all. It's up to the operator whether he chooses to keep going or not. What we actually subsidise something like 3% of the network in Kent. So 97% of it is commercially run, nothing to do with us at all. So it's a tiny, tiny programme. What unfortunately appeared in the media was a list of all the services, all the routes that we do have provided some subsidy to, and therefore could be affected if we withdraw some subsidy. but only could be affected, and it could only be the odd service on those routes affected. So it's not a question of the whole thing being withdrawn, or ever was going to be. So that was a bad misinformation, to which some of it was the County Council's fault, quite honestly. I don't think we were very clever about the way we got the information out. We didn't, and we should have done, publish a very clear explanation of what we do, and so people understand what the real problem was, rather than just look at a list of routes. Not surprisingly, perhaps the media picked it up and made the worst possible connotation on it. Again, picked up by all the Kent MPs, who also went off on a wild goose chase and wrote those unpleasant letters around the place. Peace has broken out in that area, but the reality is that we are trying to save money from our bus subsidy, because we have to save money. We are in a parlous financial problem, which you're probably all well aware of. We're having to make some very significant savings next year. We've already saved over £500 million out of the County Council budget over the last 8 years. Our budget is now 40% less than it was, and we've had to do that while keeping all our services going, and absorb some very, very large increases in our social care budget, pressures, which is the social care problems are going up astronomically, and we have to cater for that. And some of it is very difficult to cater for. I mean, one family with complex needs coming into the county who we don't know about, and they suddenly appear on our doorstep, that can cost us £500,000 a year. One family, and we don't know anything about them until they arrive, and we have no option. We have to support them, quite rightly. We have to look after them. But those are the sort of pressures we're facing, and we're having to make savings across the whole of our budget. And as your chairman said, I'm responsible for community services. A number of the ones I run, such as the wardens and my arts and my sport and my community safety, it's all discretionary services. We don't have to do that. We do it because we think that's what the people of Kent want, and we're right. But as we're squeezed for money, we're having to retreat into our statutory requirements. We have to retreat into what we have to do, whether we've got no option about it at all. And that's putting a lot of pressure on our discretionary services. And the bus subsidy is entirely discretionary. We have no statutory requirement to support bus services at all. We do it because we think it's important to the public, but we don't have to do it. So we're trying to save some money, and we're now looking therefore at how we can possibly do it. Those routes you were identified are ones that we are provide some subsidy to. It doesn't necessarily follow that anyone necessarily happens to any of them, or indeed to any particular service on them. We are going out to consultation starting in the middle of January, and that will last until March, and that will come out with the opportunity for everyone to say what they think in their area is an important route and why they think it's important. Once we've got all those responses in, we look at what they require, see what we can sensibly do. And one of the things we are really trying to do is avoid waste. All of you will know, you see buses every day trundling around Kent, large buses with one person, or in some cases nobody on them. And our most expensive route costing us £18 per person per journey in subsidy. But that's nonsense. I mean, that's absolute nonsense. And it's a waste of public money. So we will try to eliminate the waste, try and see where we really need to subsidise if indeed we do, and then try and save a significant amount of money for the public purse to enable us to carry on doing some of the things we want to keep doing. So nothing is going to happen, no decision has been made. We go to the consultation first, and then we look at it again in March, and then at the end of March, or whenever it comes in, and I'll have the opportunity to come and talk to you again if we need to see what's important to Wittersham, what we think is really, if there are any proposals which are affecting you, we need to see if we can defend against those. And I'll do what I can to argue your case clearly in terms of important ones. We understand how important they are, but we have to save money. I mean, we've had an awful time this year trying to balance our budget for next year. We still have not got a budget for next year. We've still got a gap, which we at the moment can't fill. We're visiting the impossible to see whether the impossibles are really impossible, just quite impossible. And then we go around again, look at them again, and that's what position we're in. And we're having to make some really difficult decisions which do affect people's lives, and that's a very unpleasant thing to do. So against that background, I hope you can understand why we have to do it, and we will do it as carefully as we can, and have the opportunity to come and talk to you again before any decisions are made.
I think you know, Mike, anyway, that the 312 service, our main one, which I got onto about through Joe at the time, that seems, we haven't seen the timetable, but it seems as though the Sussex County Council have pretty much saved it as it is.
Oh, they could.
They've apparently, we're led to believe, they've given it back to Stagecoach, or Stagecoach have taken it back from the 24th of this month, and they've made some small changes in the timetable, but nothing dramatic. So
No.
against the worries that you have elsewhere, we might have come out quite well there.
Well,
The
the
293
experience-
though is yours.
It is
and we
ours,
don't
yes.
know what's happening to that.
No, and we won't know, I'm afraid, until after consultation, Chairman. But I mean, the experience of other counties where they have had to withdraw subsidies, that in many cases, not all, but in many cases, the operators have chosen to continue the service anyway. You know, they said, right, it's a viable service even without subsidy, so we're going to continue. So it doesn't follow that we withdraw service if something happens necessarily. But we will have all, I hope, all the answers to your obvious questions when we've done the consultation and we come up with a plan. And sorry, if I just finish finally, that alongside this, we are looking at the possibility of how we can establish where it's desired some sort of community bus network. Because if there are genuine needs which we can't fulfil, is a better way of doing it. And I'm very interested. The Day Centre in Tenterden are very proactive about being interested in taking part in any community bus programme for the area which they cover, which of course includes here. They already run buses themselves for their own clients. But they'd be interested, when I spoke to them, not only in providing their buses when they're not being used, but also running the service. And that was really important to me, because buses are quite honestly the less of the problem. It's actually running it that's the problem. And if they're prepared to run it for their area, which is quite large, then that actually has the makings of a very possible viable service. And,
just an update for you there.
Yeah.
Roger Parker, who's gone now, but he was here earlier. He and I attended the KCC seminar on community transport. We met the chief exec of the Tenterden Day Centre there. I visited her a couple of days later, and so we've talked through that. Before you came tonight, we've talked about the fact, just between ourselves, that we have in our community-led plan a number of issues that are kicking around there, of things like community transport, things like taking people to hospital, slightly different, and also the proposal that, well, it's not a proposal now, it's a plan, that Day Centre are putting Meals on Wheels on as well. So all those things are within our broad purview without having decided quite what we feel we can do and how and who and when. But we're aware of it. So the 312 in terms of a route bus that people can get when they want, rather than when they've run up 2 days before, is key to the village. The service to William Harvey is probably something completely different, and the opportunity to possibly plug into the Day Centre is something very interesting.
And we are looking at putting, as well as reducing our subsidy, we're going to put some of that money back in again to try and support the community bus. You may have heard that already.
Yes, indeed. I think we heard all about Wheels and Wheels and things like that at the seminar that your people ran. Whether that is actually a runner for something of our size, even in collaboration with other villages, probably less likely. But the Day Centre may give us an alternative to that, and they're definitely very keen to establish a service. Yes. Okay.
Well, that's really what I wanted to say, is try and hopefully shoot the fox, because some of the headlines were not very palatable.
Does anyone want to raise questions with Mike, since you have the opportunity, either on buses or I'm sure he'd answer questions on anything else as well? Oh, you got away with it, Mike.
Well, so far, that's right. Good. Well, I don't think anything. I mean, just generally speaking, the action at the moment is all about money. We're still trying to deal with this year's budget, which is we've got an overspend on, which we've got to close by the end of March. We have not yet set our budget for next year. We haven't managed to identify the savings needed, and the year after we're going to be even worse. So we're going to have a couple of really difficult years, I think. But for all that, I'm really pleased. We have actually managed to generally keep all our services going. They may be a bit thinner, and they are a bit thinner, many of them, and we've got 70 wardens now, where we did have 100 a few years ago, and so on. But at least they're still there, and they can be built on again. So and I feel certainly in my area, it's really important to keep services going, because we can always build. But once you lose a service, then that's difficult. Then you're in trouble. So I'm pleased that we've managed to keep it all going. Nothing is yet closed. We haven't closed any libraries. And we've made lots of economies on libraries, we managed to do it without closing them. So that's the message to the County Council. And alongside that, our other big concern at the moment is our work with the National Health Service on what we're going to do about old people's care, and to try and somehow solve this awful anomaly of people sitting in hospital who don't need to be there and ought to be out in the community, treated by social care, because we haven't got any money to do it with, we can't do it. And yet they're sitting in hospital. 30% of the people in hospital do not need to be there, and they're absorbing an enormous number of resources by being there and doing themselves no good at all. And that's a disaster. So if we can find some way of squaring that one away and getting them out of hospital, getting that money out of the hospital into adult social care within the community, then we can actually all benefit, I think.
Sure. Anyone else have questions for Mike or points?
No, thank you.
No.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. You're very welcome to stay longer if you
Well,
wish, or not if you want to go home.
if you don't mind, I'm going to get home.
Okay.
It'll be a long day.
Well, thank you very much
Thank you
for
very much.
dropping in.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Right, okay. Back on our agenda then. So we're on the number 10, approve ICCM training course for the clerk stroke burial officer. This is one, remember that we signed up with ICCM the other month, and Yvonne has spotted they do a whole load of training, but one particular one has come in, which is, as Yvonne said, she's never done any training on the burial officer thing, and she probably ought to go off, if only to find out what it is that we ought to be doing, or things that are coming down the line. So, the details, Yvonne, are...
It's on the 24th of April. It's at their quarters.
Manor Park.
Yes.
Manor Park Cemetery,
Which
East London.
East London. So we're going up by train. It's £135, which includes lunch and refreshments. There are only 12 places, so although it's April, I want to bring it up now because it's obviously their offices, I would say, rather than a hall or something. So it's, but it does cover an awful lot. It starts at 9:30 with a morning session. Local authorities, cemeteries order, 1977. General powers of management.
That's going to be enthralling day by the sound.
Compliance, registers and records, granting, extending rights, new income streams. Consent, avoiding disputes. Burials, depth, shallow graves. Administrative processes, getting it right. Certificates, problems and solutions. Grave digging,
Morning
grave.
coffee at this point.
Right grave, wrong grave. Checking procedures, preparations. Mourners backfilling. Mourners carrying coffins. Unconfined burial. Memorials, unstable memorials, how to avoid this and reduce costs, responsibilities, inspections, 12:30 lunch, that's all people like. Afternoon session, creating burial space, extending the viability of cemeteries, reclamation and reuse of graves, using the law, statutory and church, exhumation, law and practice, registration, transferring burial rights, overview, refresher, lawful process, getting it right, avoiding disputes and errors, legal documents. 4 p.m. close.
Brilliant.
No expected report.
Yeah. Really comprehensive, all sorts of concepts that you would never really think of.
Well, as I say, all I've ever done is taken on what went before. And when,
It's a whole new career structure, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I was clerk all those, 30 odd years ago. Well, Reg Sweatman did all the burial. I didn't have anything to do with it. So when I took it on 16 years ago, it was a case of you've got to do the burial, but it was only a case of picking up what went before. I've never,
Well, if you get anything out of it and it's the new revenue streams, you can well cover your costs.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the hell.
Yeah, so it will be the train as well, which of course is going to be more expensive.
Just in the morning.
Yes, because it will be rush hour time, so we're looking £60 odd instead of the huge, train cars that I never charge for. So there will be that as well.
Has to be. It's the trouble is it's a thicket legally which we don't have a problem with, but it's a bit like the Invicta law. It could always come and bite us. So
Well, particularly as we are expanding.
And they're specialists, of course.
Yeah.
It's not the everyday. In fact, even the Invicta, of course, being KCC, they're not burial artists. So.
Without creating an unnecessary onerous task for you, seriously, it sounds very comprehensive. It'd be useful to set aside some time when you come back from it to sort of bring us all up to speed on the things that you think would be relevant to a parish councillor. And we might even open the invitation to other local parish councils. Maybe if we charge them £5 to come along, you've covered your costs of the rail. You know, you can hold a little info session for them.
Right. Okay. So are we all agreed that Yvonne's going to do that? Yes. Thank you. Good. Now we come on to a significant issue, which is the budget and the precept proposals. Now Yvonne has sent out papers. One of them was blank in my case, but it wasn't the one that mattered.
Yes, I took.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you for coming.
Yes, the one I took out was the way
The detail.
Yes, I'd get a breakdown. I'd do all my figures, but you didn't really mean anything to you, so I blanked that one.
So, if we look at the first page, which is the budget proposal, you should all have that. It's the landscape one.
Are you going to spare a copy? I haven't.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
No, I did ask if anybody wanted a copy, and
Paul's come straight without it. Okay, so if you can look over Alan's. So the right-hand two columns, the key.
it's the portrait one, yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, I've got that.
The
Oh, right.
portrait one, yeah.
Okay.
So the right-hand two columns, we've got a straight proposal 1718 based on the current precept, which is 24,035, or when George and I had our finance working party with Yvonne, we suggested putting in one with plus 2% on the precept. Why did we pick 2? We've had some bigger numbers in the past because we felt that we didn't need more than 2, or we aimed not to need more than 2, but 2 is it's the kind of effective standstill because of a little bit of inflation. In fact, inflation's above 2 at the minute, and there's no criticism for doing 2%. So you'll find when you go down that works out quite well, the 2% one. But we've got a choice of those 2 or anything else that the council wants. 24035, there's nothing put in as concurrent functions grant. We will in fact get one, but Ashford have made it clear in their instructions this year that we should not treat it as part of our budgeting process. It's supposed to be a bit of icing, so we've done it that way. The council tax support has actually gone down from 960 to 920, and I think that will be our demographic. The principle of council tax support, I don't think they dropped it to 40 quid for anything else. The principle of council tax support, if the council gives it, and they don't all, but luckily Ashford does, is that it's the amount, or in fact it may be a slightly lower version of it, but whatever. It's the amount that we lose where, for instance, a house somewhere has got a single occupant and they pay a reduced value of council tax because they've got a single occupant, then the government gives Ashford money to make that up for parish councils only. Ashford loses the money and they don't get it. But because parish councils, where they had a lot of old people, could really suffer, or single people even, then it was recognised that they should have it made up. The government gives Ashford the money, but it's not ring-fenced, and some of them do not pass it on, and it causes a lot of annoyance. We do get it. But the 960's gone down to 920, I'm assuming, because their tax base is altered. You know, in other words, we are due less and we get less. That gives us those 2 figures, the 24,955 or the 25,435. Then the 2 columns are basically the same. We've got the various expenses which Yvonne has postulated, and George and I went through these with her. They are, broadly speaking, the kind of running levels, sometimes with a flex because we know something is changing. The only change here that she's got between the 2 columns is the sundry expenses, where she just added on the 2%.
And you'll notice also the courses because of the...
Because we know.
The ICCMY.
Yeah, indeed.
So much more.
Indeed. And in fact, I mean, if there's a budget we are ever likely to go over these days, it's probably courses. But anyway, this is where we are in terms of our work finger for a budget. So we come down to the green figure 11153 of the basic numbers. Let me just stress this has got nothing in it for the caretaker account except the 4,000 that we pay. Otherwise it's a separate account. Then section 137, for anyone who doesn't remember, that's that 2,500. That is the amount that we budget of the money that we can spend. We could spend more than that, but we only budget this amount, which does not fall within an immediate heading of the Local Government Act. Being a parish council without power of general competence, we don't have power of general competence, and we can't have power of general competence as things stand. I won't go into why. We can only spend under headings of the Local Government Act, where it says you can spend this, you can spend that, you can spend the other, different headings. But we're also allowed to spend about £7 something per elector on other things. Now that would be about 3,500 in this, sorry, that would be about 7,000 in this village. We don't spend 7,000, we don't have that much money. But we do put 2,500 in as a budget, and a lot of that goes to pay Outlook on Oxley, the donation that we make so that they can carry on. So that's section 137. You've got the caretaker scheme, the 4,000, churchyard, maintaining it. Then we get to other expenses. VSW is the volunteer support warden, that's Lee. The new hedge on the green, there's a little number put in there, maybe not enough, but there's a little number. There's the notice board on Forge Meads that you can see that we've said that we would like to change because the old one was done in. The Kissing Gate we've already agreed, so, and we've got the money, so there's nothing in there. The war memorial cleaning we've got a reserve for. Cemetery extension is just, you know, putting money aside each year. Contingencies we've reduced, as you can see, by about half. And total expenditure in the first of those two columns actually exceeds the precept. So that's why the 2% proposal makes more sense, where we finish up with a surplus of about 300 in there. Okay? That's the budget as it runs from the precept. Okay? Money in, money out. Now, the other thing that Yvonne has put out, which she said I had asked for, and we started doing this about 3 years ago, because we've got these big projects which are coming out of cash, which we've accumulated, it is a good discipline. It certainly would be in the commercial sector, but I think it is here too, to make sure that we're not happily spending money that we haven't got. So the way this landscape works is to start, and Yvonne did it at the end of October, with the bank balance that day, okay, 31st of October, the 72,000. She took off the scheme that's in the caretaker's account, because that belongs to the caretaker's account, not General Parish Council. Then she's knocked off the amount that we think we will spend between the end of October and the end of the financial year. So, you know, there's the caretaker scheme. The 4,000 that we pay in had not been paid in at that point, so that's got to come off. Then the clerk's salary, the clerk's expenses, the hire of the club room, the sundries and whatever, the money for the laptop, which of course was paid after the end of October. The repair of the churchyard wall, which will be money going out, as the figure, best figure we've got at the minute. Contribution to the volunteer support warden that we've just had the invoice for. The Kissing Gate, the section 137 money that we expect to spend. So we've got to knock off about 15,000 from our balance that we'll be spending before the end of the year. Then we've got the various reserves where we're holding them for particular things, the cemetery, the churchyard, the war memorial cleansing, the pond project, the water supply, the green and what have you. Those reserves have all been knocked off, including the burial account, which I'll come back to, because the burial account is always kept as a separate pool of money. We've got to knock off another 31,000. So that gives us a forecast of cash that we expect to have at the end of March next year, which is what I would call unspoken for. It's what we've got, that's the money that belongs to the caretaker scheme, the money we expect to spend by the end of March, and the money that we're holding in reserves, so they're spoken for. That leaves us with 24,000. Now the 24,000, we've now got to think about the cemetery. And we know that we put in initially, we had 10,000 for the access route, we had 1,000 for the cost of preparing land, was 1,500, but we brought it down to 1,000, because we've got that quote, 850
plus the
plus
grass.
the grass. 1250 for the tree felling, we know. 2,050 is the best figure we've got at the minute for the fence. The hedge is a wet finger, we don't know. We've put in 2,000, we have no idea how much the hedge will cost. And then we've got a contingency of 7,000. So that has now got 23,300 in it. We originally were talking last year of 30,000 for the cemetery. We're down at 23 now. Best guess. That is not the whole cemetery forever, that is the things we're going to be tackling within the next year or so.
Legal costs are all dealt with already.
Yes, we've spent. Now, we have got 11,000 odd in the burial account. That's to say, every time Yvonne gets money in for a burial, instead of just putting it into the spending, she keeps it on one side. And there's about 11,000 there. Now, we can spend that towards fixing the cemetery. But what I have said to her, and obviously is open to you to disagree with, I've said that people who've paid for graves that they have not been buried in yet shouldn't be taken at this point. That would be what Tesco got into trouble for.
Yeah.
But people who've paid for graves that they have been buried in, that's our money. The other is,
they've had the service.
yeah, they've had the service. The rest of it is paid in advance, and we should hang on to it until we actually provide the service.
Yeah.
So she has to knock 4,880 off, which is paid in advance, but it does give us 6,200 we can put in. And there's 1661 that we've already built up as a reserve for the cemetery extension, so we can knock those two off. That means the cemetery would cost us in cash, based on these estimates, about 15.5. And if we take the 15.5 off what we had left before, that leaves us with 9,000. That 9,000, we've also got our contribution to the SIDS, if we get through in the next year, 2,000. The gateway, that's the white gates at the the entry of the village, 350. We ought to be thinking of a tree survey, as Yvonne has importantly remembered, because we haven't had one for a few years.
That's to do with
For the insurance, 1,500. And the bus shelter repairs, we put a wet finger in of 1,000, probably over, but that's what we put in. That adds up to 4,850 out of the 9,000, so that leaves us with 4,000. That's not, bear in mind, only 4,000 in the bank, but that's 4,000 that we haven't put a marker on, because we've still got 18,000 of reserves, plus the 4,850 cash balance. Sorry, it's not 4,850, it's about 4,250. And we've got money in the caretaker account, should we need to borrow it, as it were, in the way that we lent the caretaker account money years ago to buy the new mower when there wasn't enough in it. So what this is here to do is to give us a degree of justifiable confidence that we're not embarking on something that will cause us to run out of cash. This is a sort of rational way of looking. It's a bit of a cash flow forecast, really, with the best figures we've got.
It also works the other way, that it makes us realise we don't want to be hoarding cash for no apparent reason, do we?
Oh, exactly right.
That's the other side of
You
that.
know why,
Yeah, why we've got
we've
it.
got
Yeah.
Exactly
Can you
right.
just remind me what we're accruing each year for the caretaking, in the sense that every X number of years there's a new van needed, new equipment.
Exactly.
What are we putting the right amount aside for that at the moment?
We are okay. We did the van. We got the van out of our resources.
Yeah.
We will have to do the mower. There will be, of course, course a replacement coming up in time of the strimmers and the the blowers and the this and the that. But basically the caretaker scheme does not show any signs of being flaky. It was very flaky at the beginning, but we've grown a bit of fat, which now gives us confidence that we can stand the slings and arrows that might come along. Okay. So the other thing I did before coming out was to just look through. This is last year's. I'm talking about if we go for this, the 2% increase. So we're without the 2%. But last year, the year we're still in at the moment, I went through all the Band D charges for all the parishes in Ashford. 15 of them are higher than us, 23 are lower than us. Particular ones of interest, ours is £45.50 in the current year. Particular ones of interest against our 45, Tenterden, because they have more there, £95. Pluckley, £97. Don't know why, there'll be a reason. Appledore, 76. On the lower side, Stone, 27. Don't have a lot. I mean, people in Stone will come over here, of course. Interestingly, Woodchurch, 27. And Woodchurch has got about 50%, 70% more tax base than us. So arguably, Woodchurch isn't spending a lot. Don't know why. Or they're spending the same amount, but they've got more people to pay for it. I don't think our 45 is embarrassing. I mean, we used to be very low before we pushed it up quite a lot in the last 5 years that you and I have been on, 6 years. But on the other hand, we did that in order to get the money for the cemetery.
Yeah. That's the reason. And it's still, for all the Band D, if I remember correctly, it still is under, that'll still be under 2% of the total council tax. The parish share equivalent.
I can tell you what it'll work out at. The Band D is 45.
Yeah.
I'm an F, which is just under 50% more than that, which takes us 45, about 75.
Yeah.
75, and I'm paying about £230 a month, 2,300. So it's about 2%.
Yeah. So 2% of 2% is 0.04% of the total county.
Yeah.
Technical term.
Yeah. Well, what we figured last year when we put it up 8%, I think, was that 8% was a fraction of KCC's 2%.
Yeah.
I mean, a small fraction. So the 2% won't show. You know, if it goes from £45 to it'll be an extra 90 pence a year, won't it? 9 pence a month. Now, that's not to say that 9 pence isn't important, but it's not very important when the overall council tax is going to go up £1 a month for Band D.
Okay.
I had one question on this, which was the PC website that has gone down to 0.
Yes, because we paid its renewal thing. We paid for 2 years, so we don't need to.
Do we need any other? Do we need to sort of plan for any other IT costs at all? Because it seems a bit strange not to have anything in there, given that we're digitising more of our work. I don't know. I'm coming there.
Right, Paul, but then we've got contingency.
Okay, that's enough. Then that's fine.
I think we're okay there. I mean, the trouble is with well, you've budgeted as many things as I have in the past. You can get a little bit too carried away with budgeting. It is to give you a sense of how you're going to. It'll be worse in KCC, but give you a sense of how you're going to get through. And then some things will be up, some things will be down, and some things you change your mind as you go along. That's one of the reasons for that cash flow forecast, to say that if things come along, we actually are stable. When you and I joined the council, we were actually struggling to cope with the amount that we had, because we had very little in the bank, and we were spending everything we got. And you must go back to an even worse time soon. Okay. So, I mean, you know, we should be pleased with ourselves that I mean, we're charging our residents more, but we're also doing a lot more for it.
Yeah.
Got to make a
Thank you very much for
Thank
coming.
you very much.
Nice to
Nice
see
meet
you.
Thank you.
Have a nice Christmas.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye. Okay, so are we happy to go with the precept with the 2% increase?
Yeah.
Because that's all we have to, well, we're going to do two things really. We have to fix a total sum for the precept. It's not the band D we fix. It might actually turn out to be, once we went down without realising it, it's the amount we want as a check.
Yeah.
And the second thing we have to do, of course, is to actually agree our budget so that everyone has something to work to. So if we're happy with that,
As I say, because normally I would have to ratify we usually have the one meeting where we can discuss it all, and then I can make any adjustments if necessary, and then the following meeting we ratify it. And that will be January now, so I can leave it until January. So if you've got anybody?
No, that was
You're all
quite happy with what was.
Yeah. So
Good job.
okay.
Get ahead of ourselves.
So propose.
okay, George will propose, and Paul will second.
Yeah.
Everyone happy? Unanimous? Thank you for coming, Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Looking forward to seeing you in your uniform.
We all are.
Not in any weird way.
Oh yes, it is. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we've agreed all of that, and that can go into Ashford then. Thank you very much. The next thing is correspondence, none, noting none, working party reports, the caretaker.
The only thing that came in today, you might be pleased to hear, Jeremy,
Oh yeah.
from Michelle Byrne. Looking at the contract, she did come to me earlier about renewing the contract, and I asked what the difference was. So she says, looking at the contract, I don't think it differs greatly from the ones issued to the other schemes. So I've just deleted all reference to a pilot scheme and otherwise left it the same. I will speak to one of the lawyers after Christmas about reviewing it ready for the next one to start in May. I was also going to suggest issuing it for a longer period than 1 year, say 3 years. So you have a bit more reassurance, and I don't have to remember to send it every year. I need to get the okay with the accountants first, but if it's agreed, will this be acceptable to you? Well, I've gone back and said yes, because that seems...
Absolutely.
Then she carries on, I don't think I reissued you a new contract 2017-18 unless you can tell me different. The contract allows for its term to be extended year on year in writing. So as you haven't got a formal contract at the moment, I will speak to my manager about writing to that effect to tide us over until the new contract is due in May. Well, we only ever had the one, which was the pilot back in 2013.
I agree.
I also need to come and see
We've
you
just been holding over.
for a review meeting soon, just to make sure everything is okay. So I'll
Good.
talk to you about that.
I should get
in a
this
second.
done.
Brilliant. Do you actually have to wait till May? You can start a new contract any time.
Yeah,
No,
but
but
those is
it's on
actually...
it's on
Yeah,
actually
anniversary.
annually because of the sums that they give us.
Okay.
Yeah, so whatever she's... Yeah, so...
Okay.
just
That's
do
good.
whatever.
Excellent.
But I thought to have 3 years
No, that would be
was
brilliant.
As strong as people can take.
You can come, of course, for these caretaker
Excuse-
working parties
excuse
and join in on that, George, if you wish. I knew you'd really enjoy it. Okay, so the next thing then is the monthly transaction statement. Is there anything to say about that?
And we've got money in from Ashford for the caretakers scheme, but we haven't got... It doesn't show in the main one anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. One thing I noticed. Oh yes, that's it. Yeah, there's the laptop.
Mm.
Yeah. It's interesting when you look at the main transaction statement. There is the voices for the UK net renewal. There is the salary to the clerk, and there is the reimbursement of the laptop, and everything else is caretaker. Can I sign this then? Everyone happy?
Yeah.
I'm going to sign here.
Thank you.
And on the back as well?
No, no, the other one's there, they're separate. So you can see there, Paul, the balance on the caretaker.
Yeah.
Right.
Excellent, thank you.
Planning, we've received decisions. The Oast House was okayed and the Buds Cottages was withdrawn. My understanding is that that was a bit controversial with neighbours.
Very modern design, wasn't it?
No. Highways?
Well, we've had blocked drains, obviously, after all that rain
Yeah, indeed.
down the street and...
Well, they're bound to get blocked if they never clear them.
They've started the work on at Peeing Quarter.
Yeah.
So that's Southern Water. So on the corner, actually, in fact, we had the same person who originally brought to light the by the War Memorial, the flooding.
Southeast
there.
Water.
Southeast Water, is it? Okay. Also mentioned, could we do something about that? So just I've got to bring it up today. It's already started, but I have to claim zero credit for that. But
You mean the water leak has...
yeah, the water leak that was that Cole mentioned. You know, so they've been they swung into action about 4 days ago.
Okay.
I think they were putting the traffic lights out Saturday when I came
yeah.
by.
But it has been wet, it's worse, but it's been wet there ever since we've been here.
It does seem to have got particularly wet where they're working as well. I think it's work in progress. So
the trouble is today the lights were stuck on red in both directions, evidently. So
oh really?
Oh, was it? Oh, I didn't know if it was that end or the ones.
The old technique with some of them, is if you flash your lights, they'll recognise them. But everyone's busy flashing each other.
Okay. Next one is public rights of way.
Electric fence obstruction at the back of Jubilee Fields, which Tim Piper. It's got that way. It looks like loads of sheep in there at the moment.
Yeah, there's open spaces. No David anymore. Cemetery and churchyard, I think we've done to death probably, haven't we? Unless there's anything.
Probably just to let you, those of you that aren't on Facebook, I did post a lovely photo of a fairy ring in the cemetery.
Oh, you did? Yes, a lovely big fairy.
Is it an alternative service?
Yeah.
So I think you're
I
providing.
thought it was quite pretty.
Okay, Village Hall Management Committee, George, you mentioned the router earlier, which was helpful. How else are things going since the AGM?
We've got for those people that weren't at the AGM, we've got, and I don't know if I reported it last time, we've got
no, it's coming out.
Kerry's daughter.
No.
Julie's daughter, Kerry,
known as Kerry.
who's known as Kerry, who's offered to be our treasurer and booking clerk. I'm now chairman, and we've got Howard Oliver and Steve Sugar from the Film Society, and potentially another person as well that we're trying to recruit. And in fact, if we could get up to sort of 6, that would be a nice working number to go on. You don't, I mean, you're supposed to have 8 or however many groups that are using it, but I think that would become a bit unwieldy.
Does that mean you need another 2 then?
Yeah, well, we can only appoint another 1.
Oh, okay.
But the other one must come from one of the user groups.
Yeah.
So we've only got scope for 2 appointed officers. The others must be representatives.
Sorry to ask again because I obviously missed it, but you mentioned about the router.
Yeah.
What's happening with that?
We've given up with the one in there, and Steve Sugar is looking into the possibility of other alternatives and ultimately having one mounted in here, because we come to the conclusion that's where the meetings happen rather than in there. So
one of the things that's come onto the market that I've been aware of recently, and other clients have talked about, is something called a mesh, and effectively that's where historically you've got a router and there are parts of your property that's not that's a bit slow. Very often you put an extra bit in to try and. What the mesh does, and it's not that expensive actually, is almost imagine a net that sits on the property, so the areas and rooms that typically are out of signal then come in at the maximum strength.
Well, so we've literally gone back to square one and cancelled the deal and everything at the moment.
I'll mention it to Steve, and then you can include that on that.
So we're moving forward. Excellent. We're moving forward on getting bank accounts sorted out, and also I've got Kerry registered as a trustee, and we're working now, going through all our policies and procedures, making sure we've got everything in place that we should have. So.
And Kerry said to me this morning that she's working on the bank signature.
Yeah, we've just about done that.
And you've still got in mind, I think, the aim to, once you've got all those things put together, to go for a limited company trustee.
Well, yeah, that would have to be the next AGM now. So yes, we've got time now to look into that properly. The other thing I was thinking of was having a friends of group of people who don't want to be trustees, but would be quite happy to come and help do jobs and put chairs out or do a bit of painting or something. And one or two people already expressed an interest in that. So
that's a good point.
That's something else to work on as well. So.
Thank you. The CAP meeting, you had the minutes circulated. That brings me on to the plan. The plan was published, and I think you know that. It's on the Ashford website. It's still got the 40 houses in, and I said this to the others before you came. As far as I can guess, I don't know anymore, but the Cabinet have almost certainly approved it when they saw it last Thursday, and I imagine the full council will approve it this Thursday, so then it's off to the inspector. They have made small changes to it at least. I haven't gone through word for word, but I know they've made small changes. Southern Water have demanded that they provide future access to the existing sewage infrastructure, meaning that they can't happily build over stuff they still need access to. And English Nature demanded that they changed conserve the AONB to enhance the AONB. Apparently that's a normal term that's expected, so they both got changed. There's 10 pages of comments that went in, plus their response to them, which is mostly rhubarb. They have given us only 2 little mentions. I don't think they've really taken our submission very seriously, which is a point we might make to the inspector when we get to it. There's a lot of people who are there. The people that you would expect, the ones you recognise the names of, and some of them are in for quite a lot of issues, which is why I think it's quite strange that we're only marked for 2, one of which I think we barely made. I don't think they've done it awfully well. There are also some who are listed as having made points and they're not in the key to tell you who they are. But it is all there. It's not all there, but there is a load of it.
Has that changed since it first came out, when you first flagged it then?
The plan is the slight changes. The responses have only just been published. They were never published before. When we put our response in August, we could never see ours or anyone else's.
But that came out, what, 10 days ago?
Yes.
Oh, but it hasn't changed since then?
That's what I've got.
Yeah, okay, good.
That was actually on the Cabinet meetings agenda.
Yeah. I went through, I kind of extracted, because it's such a big document, I extracted the Wittersham slice.
Of course, that's the 10 pages plus the policy. Okay. Now, there's also, in the calc minutes, there was an issue came up where some of the other villages were agitating about the fact that that for some reason Charing thought that more sites were going to get landed in at the last minute. This was before it was published. I couldn't see that as being feasible. The last one was August and was commented on, and they were then shuffling that around, making any changes according to the consultation, and it went to Cabinet. And indeed, I said that, it's actually in the minutes here. And Mr. Smith noted that all felt the way that the admission sites had been dealt with was improper, and agreed the committee should make representation on the process to the inspector at the inquiry. He thought ABC will not accept the criticism. I don't think I used those words, but it's probably true. Because they wanted to be putting in more objections at this point to the Cabinet, and I said, you're wasting your time. They've done the work for the last 3 years, and it's going to go to Cabinet, and they're going to go stamp. There's going to be no more than that. But anyway, that's where we were then. Anyhow, it was agreed that Alison would write off to, she's the chairman, she would write off to Simon Cole, the Ashford person, having a bit of a moan, saying that because he was due to come to the meeting and we could have all had a go at him, not that it would have done any good. We couldn't do that, so we're going to write to him to say, well, all these things we were going to say to you, what do we do with them? And he's, of course, come back with the Arbus huts. This is what happened. Dear Simon, I'm sorry you couldn't attend the Calcashford group meeting. You were missed. I hope you're feeling better soon. I have some general comments that members wanted me to raise with you regarding the local plan. They're as follows. Concerns over infrastructure and how these are being addressed in the local plan. Well, we know about that. Okay. Omission sites, particularly new additions. Well, I think it is the omission sites. I don't think if there are any new additions, it's even more ridiculous than it was before. You know, it's like saying don't bother to have a 3-year plan process, just chuck them all in at the end. Process late additions with little time to consult. Well, that's what happened last August, and we are unhappy about it, of course. Parity between landowners and developers who've gone through the whole process and late entries which appear to have been given a lighter touch. And I think that is true. That's my perception as well. Because after all, you know, the Pipers site and the Moors site, they came and had the big meeting in the hall 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, we'll come to that later. Credibility. Parishioners may feel their parish council is letting down when new sites have been recommended that fall outside the consultation process and plans already approved. We had a bit of that. The group wanted these concerns to be noted as, if asked, to speak to the inspector when the plan is scrutinised, it would be based on concerns already tabled. In other words, we felt that it was reasonable that if we were going to have a go at Ashford at the inspector level, then they ought to know. I know individual parishes have made their comments, but this is a group response levelled at a more strategic level. Can you advise if we should make these general comments known to you or on the planning portal and or to our ward members and the relevant portfolio holders? Well, I said at the meeting that there was no way we could get in with any consultation responses because the deadline was 31st of August. We did it. Okay. He has come back with what I don't think is... It's the sort of thing you would expect, but it's not actually very honest. Dear Alison, I think these are comments to make to ward members as the scope for making formal comments on the plan is now well in the past. Well, that was always clear in my view. I'm a little curious as to the concerns raised about the so-called late additions to the plan, and this is where I think he's being unfair. I am aware that some parish councils may not have fully understood the omission site issue, although we have been at pains to explain to anyone who's approached us. There is no process for the council to consult on omission sites. These are sites simply being promoted by landowners, developers in objection to the local plan. Now he contradicts himself, i.e. they do not have the support of the council and are not included in the local plan. Well, they bloody well are, because it's now the one in Wittersham. The plan-making process allows anyone to promote an alternative or additional site to those being proposed by the council when it comes to the formal consultation stages. I don't understand the point about late entries being given a lighter touch, or what that's meant to imply. Well, he does, of course. Infrastructure concern. The thing is that, actually I found it somewhere else. He said that it may be actually it's in the answers to one of the concerns.
Yes.
They say it went through this process and that process. Well, it plainly didn't, because that process was done 2 years ago. It may have been rushed through it later. And as I say, he says they're not in the plan, and yet they get into the plan. Infrastructure concerns are well rehearsed and understood, and I know genuinely held. Obviously, the Borough Council is not solely responsible for the delivery of all services and infrastructure, and the role of the local plan is to make clear where new development needs to make contributions towards or otherwise help deliver new infrastructure. However, we also have to be pragmatic and understand the scope and severity of any infrastructure deficit that is alleged, as it's rare for planning applications to be dismissed in appeal situations on such grounds where developers are prepared to offer limited mitigation as part of any Section 106 package. Well, if you take that at face value, that's why the infrastructure is rubbish, because the appeal will always go in the favour of the developer once he's made a bit of an effort, and then it never gets done. I mean, that's
classic lowball to get the thing through. And then
if there are any specific points that are raised that I can deal with separately, then please feel free to forward those to me or ask the PC in question to do so, and I'll attempt to respond as soon as I can. I did wonder about whether to go back to him and say, it's all very well for you saying this, that and the other, but if you just look at Wittersham and the way it's been dealt with, it doesn't fit with your thing. But in a way, all I'm doing, to be crude about it, is just peeing in the wind. You know, it's they are where they are, the officers are going where they are pressed by the councillors and by the government guidance, and it'll happen as it happens.
On the other hand, if you feel strongly about it, or we feel strongly about it, it wouldn't hurt to make a response and say, just so they haven't got away with it.
I think I agree with George, particularly that just making those points in a way that doesn't imply that we think the whole thing's going to change, but actually just stated on record that the concerns that we have is an important point to make, I think, because this isn't the end of it. No. Whether it's 5, 10, 15, however many years in the future, and I think it's really important to state that, the concerns, because the process to me is, it's we could have predicted this a couple of years ago.
Well, we did.
Almost. Now it's great, isn't it, with hindsight, that actually Stocks Road looked as such a wonderful opportunity. And in fact, the objections that were made then pretty much had all been kicked into touch now.
Well, they're certainly inconsistent, however you
absolutely. But the fact is, we will have stuff now imposed, and it's happened in other villages where they haven't really got their act together, they haven't put anything forward, and then it gets imposed. And that's what we predicted would happen. And we're still back in the same situation as right now, which is why I suggested not tonight, but next year we need to start thinking about a longer term plan, because where we are right now in this village is that no kids in this village can afford to stay here. No properties there. So however you solve it, whether it's imposed or proactive or a mixture of the two, whatever the solution is, something has to be done. And in this case, I think it's important to put our stick in the ground and say that we're not happy with the way this has been achieved.
The trouble is that it is. You weren't here when we were talking about the tile house orchard, and the nuance there. And we won't waste your time or our time now going through it with everyone else here. But it is another nuanced situation, because 40 houses fits in with the community-led plan if you divide it into 13 years. 3 times 13. And we've got 13 years before 2030 where the plan runs to. However, they're in the wrong place. And we had a better place. And the objections, as you said, have suddenly been swept aside. And therefore, we're caught between saying, well, we're not against having some houses. There's a general view about having some houses and having them spread out. They won't actually be built 3 a year because builders don't work 3. I mean, even the shop came in 7, but nevertheless, they come in smaller doses. But to have 40 houses in the wrong place when we had an opportunity of 27 in a better place, and as Miriam has told us in the past, a phase 2 was always there as well. That could make the 40, but it would be phase 2, so it was later and all the rest of it. It's the fact that we've got the wrong answer out of an imperfect process being forced down our throats. But we're not saying, this parish council is not saying, no more houses over our dead body and all that. And to be fair to Miriam, nor she ever said that. She said, yes, houses, it's a question of where they go.
I also think if you look at the size of the plot and the number of houses and what have you, they're going to be rammed in there.
The number per acre, I did actually write it down. I think it's about 6.5 per acre gross.
Yeah, but you've also got to take into account the
6.5 per gross acre, which is not huge. I mean, it can go higher.
Yeah, except that doesn't account for what I call dead space.
No, I'm saying gross. You've got to get the roads out of that.
But that councillor did say it was up to 40 houses.
Not now. It says
it
about 40, I think.
Because he was very keen on that.
And no one's going to convince me that's going to be set in stone.
No.
it could be 45, 50.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Banks.
it's if you look at some of the other villages,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
talking to the guys out in
Well, Walden can have that.
Bethersden,
Yeah.
what have they got? 100 and something coming there?
Oh, there's some that
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to the when they had the coffee caravan visit there, and they've got development going on. I mean, it's like it's. I know there's some ribbon development villages in Kent anyhow. It's a bit of a symptom there, but that's going to be sort of all along the highway kind of thing, and a long way from their service delivery points.
Yeah, from their centre.
So,
Okay.
are we doing anything about this that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, if councillors want me to, then I will try and.
The
Point
comments
out
you were
something
making
to-
earlier,
Yeah.
saying in your sort of contrary comments back against what he'd said, I would like to have seen those in some sort of letter to
Okay.
respond.
I'll try and put something together.
Yeah.
We're getting a little bit tight now with time pressures, but I'll try and put something together and pass it around.
Thank you.
I'm
One
not
of
sure
the
it'll
one of the
be
biggest
full.
concerns was the whole access piece from and safety and that sort of doesn't seem to be really addressed in there. If you go through it, they focused on what I call almost the statutory or well-known objections and dealt with those. But actually, what I call the really local objections of having a road with all that traffic coming out of just which is which road is which by Mervyn.
That's green.
Yeah,
That's green.
and that's not really been addressed in there, and I think we should address that.
It is
That
in the,
design.
It's in the comments.
It's in the
and
comments.
They just say highways don't mind.
Well, yeah, I know, but
Which is
that's
not an
to
answer.
me, it's not an answer. And that is whether you want the housing or not. The fact is that the safety thing of the roads and coming out and what have you. Say highways, one objection. I'm not convinced that highways have spent more than 10 seconds looking at it.
It's not suitable.
They looked at the plan that is in the thing. They haven't come along here. They may or may not have any idea of what it looks like.
Yeah. There's a bit
I
of
mean,
panic
they
in
still
this.
say that. I mean, there's some of those answers are a bit crazy. They say, "Oh well, there are 3 possible access points. That's wonderful. They're only planning to build 2 of them. They say that none of them go across the village green, and yet the plan still shows one of them going straight across the village green. They don't refer to the village green. They say an informal recreation area or something.
Huh.
I mean, it is pretty rubbishy. But then I can also sympathise with them when they're writing a 600-page plan for the whole of Ashford. They hardly know which way up they are.
Well, I think, with no disrespect, I think it's very generous of you to sympathise with them. I don't. In the sense that the standards should be higher.
Yeah.
Because I rather suspect that I haven't bothered to look at it, but other villages are being treated in the same
Oh yeah.
cavalier
I
way.
don't think we've had a.
And if they choose not to say anything and just roll over and accept it, well, I'm afraid that's their look at. But I think we should.
The key ultimately,
as George said,
the
we
key
should-
ultimately will be at the inspector, of course. But as Simon said to me, and I'm not sure if he was standing there at the time, he's not clear that the inspector would ever take something out because it would be fairly incumbent on him to find somewhere to put 40 elsewhere. And how can he?
Yes, he said that. But the only other thing is that if that's almost assuming the inspector's going to treat the whole exercise with the same cavalier approach that these people have done.
Maybe.
I'm not sure he would do, and I think that we don't know this for sure, but if we actually make our case, if he's actually maybe open to 2 or 3 changes, it could be the change that we want here in our village.
True.
True.
Of course, that takes us from, A is followed by B is followed by C. If the 40 don't go through and we don't like the 40, then we're back to where else we find houses.
Well, yes, but that's something we have.
That's
That's a task we've got to address next
Another
year. We've got to start thinking about it.
Okay.
So,
Right,
yeah.
does anyone else have, as we go around the table, other things, items for information? George?
Thanks. No.
Sue?
And maybe Yvonne knows the answer to this. Down at the bridge, there's a house, Potmanteith Cottage, that you'll be familiar with, and it's recently changed hands. It's got the same postcode as myself, TN37PU. It's on the other side of the river. The new man there thinks he lives in Wittersham, but the parish boundary is the channel. Now, he came and asked me, am I in Wittersham or am I in Rolvenden? And I said, well, you've got the same postcode as me and you've got a Wittersham address, because if you write to him, it's Potmanteith Cottage, Wittersham, but he's on the other side of the channel.
Yeah.
Now, I hopped from one leg to the other, and I couldn't answer his question.
It's quite biblical, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
There is,
probably
there is a boundary marked on the OS map.
but he's got the same postcode as me. He would,
No,
yeah, but that's
not
different.
the
That's nothing to do
house.
with parish.
okay,
Mm.
and he's been sold a house that's in Wittersham, as far as he's concerned.
That's
And as
just
far as
the
he's
post
concerned,
office.
he's in Wittersham, but he's on the other side of the river.
Isn't the
I'm
key
saying
question
the
is
OS
whether,
map.
whether we get his
Council tax.
council tax?
Yeah.
If we
We
do,
get it. It's on ours. If
if
we
we-
get
yeah.
it, it's on Robertons.
Mm.
Indeed. But the parish, the OS map does have a boundary on it. If you,
And that goes along the channel, you think?
Whether he's
Well,
on the
it'll show it
Wittersham
somewhere.
electoral roll.
And then, of course, if he is in Wittersham, but
He's just moved
of
in.
course,
yet.
he got the invitation to the Rolvenden Parish Council new residents Christmas
I
drink
would think
party.
he's theirs.
So that was his idea.
So they think he's theirs.
He can go to both.
Well, no, there isn't one here, you know. And he said,
That was his plan. That's why I suggested we ought to have one
I
as
thought I
well.
would
yeah.
bring it to your attention. He said it would,
He's a
when
very nice
was
chap.
Wittersham, because he
He's a-
regarded himself
yeah,
as being a
nice,
member
nice
of the Wittersham parish.
Yeah, no,
And
yeah.
But he
was
went to
wondering when we-
Rolvenden for the
He was wondering when
party.
we were having ours, and I embarrassed him. He said, I didn't think we had one.
You need to try and nass him because he could be you're the outpost at the moment.
Indeed.
You're the head of security for the area. You could push it out. Just think of that responsibility. You could delegate to each other to the cottage.
So, well, have I got a definitive answer, do you think, or
I would
have I
say
not?
he's in Robin.
I would say he's in
Look at
Rolvenden.
yeah, I'd say he's
But-
wrong.
but
But
then-
look at the map.
What do the deeds of his house say?
But he's been told by the estate agent he's in Wittersham, and everybody
Well,
else
I
is
can
told.
tell you that the Rolvenden council tax last year was 36.93 against our 45. So if he's a
Right,
band
what did
D,
it be?
he'll be saving £9 a year, and then pro rata for whatever band he's in.
Yeah.
But given the fact that hang on, here's an interesting point, that you can actually stand as a parish council if you live within 3 miles
Yeah.
from the boundary. So let's not put him off completely.
No, sounds like you're being.
I'll see if I can find out.
We'll do him on that. Would be
I mean, that's something else as well.
a definitive view would be
Oh,
interesting.
no, that was the thing.
Those were the two items. There was the ram raid and the
Okay.
floating house.
So, and yours?
Mine is Cricket Festival this coming weekend, folks. Come and see what we are producing.
There's 43 entrants as of last
Wasn't
week.
that good?
Oh, yes,
Have we got an entrance?
Oh, we
Yeah,
have.
we have. Or you?
I think,
No, we-
I think it's
I
you,
think
George.
that's got something to
I've
do
got
with
line the
I've
crib.
got Legion one. I've got British. Got Village Hall one.
I've got knit and stitch one
Oh.
and Walker's one.
Zoe, before she came home.
So yes, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday,
Yeah.
come and of course Alan's reading on Sunday.
As I am.
And
So I'm wearing the.
as I am.
As you are. As
Don't
I
let that put you off.
Real tired. That's it. It's a stitch up, isn't it?
It is.
Are you reading anything interesting? I'm just reading. Yeah.
Number 3.
Well, I'm number 2.
Number 2.
I don't know where I am. I know it's a poem.
Reading the Sunday paper.
It's a poem. It's a
Oh,
poem.
yeah.
Council.
We're done.
Thank you.
Council.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Well, it's 2 poems.
Oh. 10 o'clock.
Bet you
About.
the